LoveLore Library. Chapter 678. Yili nodded in agreement. She thought for a moment and said, however, Feng City is different from Bian City. It is located at the intersection of Shiling's north, south, east, and west. We have to be careful of reinforcements. If we are surrounded, Chen Yun may not be able to handle it. Mo Xiuyao thought for a moment and tilted his head. There shouldn't be many reinforcements. Nanzhao has already sent out its troops. After news of Long Yang's death spread, the kingdoms of the western regions are also restless. Even if they want to send reinforcements, they may not be able to. Besides, I don't think that the Emperor of Xiling really wants Lei Dingfeng to live. The Emperor of Xiling. Yili had a flash of inspiration. Lei Jinting is leading troops outside, and now Lei Dingfeng is trapped in Feng City. This is indeed an opportunity for the Emperor of Xiling. Although the Emperor of Xiling was weak and incompetent, for such a weak and incompetent emperor to have not been succeeded by Lei Jinting for more than 20 years, he should have some ability. Although the current situation was very disadvantageous for Xiling, if the Emperor of Xiling wanted to get rid of Jinan Palace, this was the best opportunity. You sent people to find the Emperor of Xiling? Yili looked up and asked softly. Mo Xiuyao smiled faintly. Fourth young master Su. Among the 5 sons of the Su family, other than the genius Su Qingchen, the most skilled and most suited to be a lobbyist was the 4th young master of the Su family, Su Qingbai. Most importantly, most people, including Lei Jinting, still thought that the 4th young master of the Su family was still farming in the northwest. Who would have thought that Su Qingbai had secretly run to the Emperor of Xiling City to cut off Lei Dingfeng's escape route? Isn't that too dangerous? Yili frowned and asked worriedly. Everything they said was based on the assumption that the Emperor of Xiling was willing to destroy Jinan Palace at all costs. If the Emperor of Xiling was still rational or unwilling to do so, then Su Qingbai would be in danger. Mo Xiuyao played with Yili's hand and said softly, "Don't worry. I've hired people to protect him in secret. There won't be any problems." Yili was a little surprised by his confidence. "Who is it?" "Ling Taihan and a team of Qi Lin." Mo Xiuyao laughed. Besides, even if the Emperor of Xiling really did detain Su Qingbai, he wouldn't dare to kill him in this situation. At most, he'll use him to negotiate with us. I'll try to save him. Li, I've said before that I'll protect anyone you care about. I won't let him take any risks. Hearing this, Yi Li's heart softened. She gently leaned into Mo Xiuyao's arms. For Ling Taihan to protect Su Qingbai, Mo Xiuyao had to pay a price. Just from this point alone, it was clear that he had put in a lot of effort. Besides, Su Qingbai was also a grown man. He had his own ambitions and aspirations. Yili couldn't stop him from doing everything for his safety. If he didn't want to go, Mo Xiuyao couldn't force him. However, she was a little unhappy that she didn't know about this at all. Prince is really farsighted, he's already made so many arrangements without anyone noticing. Yili lightly leaned against Mo Xiuyao's chest. After being married for so many years, Mo Xiuyao could tell that she was unhappy just by hearing her voice. He hugged Yili and laughed softly. Doesn't Li dislike these things? As long as Li doesn't like it, why don't you leave it to me? Besides, this was decided before the battle. If Li knew about it at that time, wouldn't Li be put in a difficult position in front of Lady Su? Prince is really considerate. Should I thank you? Yili raised her head and looked at him with a smile. Mo Xiuyao raised his eyebrows and smiled. Of course I am the most considerate husband. Has Li seen anyone better than I? Yili rolled her eyes at him in exasperation. Good person. Is there anyone in the world more black-hearted than you, Prince? I have to be careful. Maybe one day, I'll be tricked by you. Mo Xiaoyao laughed loudly. Wife can see that husband is so black-hearted. This means that you aren't so innocent. Aren't we a match made in heaven? Husband definitely won't trick Lily. Standing outside the door, Feng Zhiyao had a conflicted expression. He couldn't decide whether to go in and disturb them. Perhaps Wang Yi was confessing his feelings to Wang Fei. What match made in heaven? Prince, you really have thick skin. Feng San, what is it? Why aren't you going in? Zhang Qilan, who had followed behind them, looked at Feng San, who was standing at the door with a frown. Feng Zhiyao gave a soft cough and glanced exasperatedly at Zhang Qilan. He said loudly, Prince, this subordinate has something to see you about. After being inexplicably glared at, Zhang Qilan felt even more inexplicable and touched his nose. Did he say something wrong? Come in. From inside the tent, Mo Xiaoyao's voice said faintly. Entering the tent, he saw that both the prince and Wang Fei were calmly looking at him. Feng Zhiyao instantly felt that the awkwardness in his heart had become awkward. He really couldn't stay calm. Feng Zhiyao scolded himself in his heart. Yili looked at him with a smile and asked, Feng San, General Zhang, what is it? Zhang Qilan looked strangely at Feng Zhiyao and reported in a clear voice, Wang Fei, we are less than 10 li from Feng City. This subordinate requests to lead the troops at the front. Yili said with a smile, General has come at the right time. Just now, Prince and I had discussed it. Chen Yun should lead the vanguard. They are young and don't have much experience. Such a small matter isn't worth General's personal attention. Zhang Qilan was a straightforward person and didn't have any thoughts of stealing credit. Chapter 679. Prince, a report from West Hill. In the tent, a soldier hurried in, presented a letter with both hands, and then left. Genom of Gojosian opened the letter and read it. His face, which had not been clear for more than half a month, was gloomy. The soldiers gathered in the tent quickly asked, Prince, what happened in West Hill? Genom of Gojosian frowned and said lightly, Zhu Yan and Long Yang died in battle, and Tingfeng is trapped in Feng City. Everyone was in an uproar. Zhu Yan and Long Yang were not ordinary people. Before Lei Jinting, they were the most famous generals in West Hill. They also belonged to the era of Long Yang and Zhu Yan, and represented the most powerful period of the Xiling army. Even Lei Jinting, who was known as the war god of West Hill, had to admit that after losing Zhu Yan and others, the strength of the Xiling army had declined. After all, no matter how powerful Lei Jinting was, he was only one person. He had to command the Xiling army and take care of political affairs. And people often could not take care of everything. But now, in less than a month, West Hill had already lost 4 or 5 cities, and even lost 2 famous generals. How powerful was the Mahist army, or Mo Xiaoyao, exactly? How is this possible? Mo Xiaoyao took Bian City in less than 10 days. Someone exclaimed. Lei Jinting said in a low voice, to be precise, it was 6 days. In 6 days, not only did he take Bian City, but he also annihilated the hundreds of thousands of troops that Zhu Yan hid near Bian City. Although Lei Jinting was also shocked and angry that Zhu Yan hid hundreds of thousands of troops, now Zhu Yan's men were dead, and the Jingwa army was wiped out. There was no point in talking about it. Hearing this, everyone couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. Prince, what should we do now? Prince. Everything else was easy to deal with, but Lei Tingfeng was trapped in Feng City, which was a big problem. Save him. Who should he send to save him? Genom of Gojosian only had one son, Lei Tingfeng. How could he not save him? Lei Jinting sucked in a deep breath and said in a deep voice, immediately dispatch the gold-clothed guards. No matter what, bring Tingfeng out of Feng City. Prince, Feng City? The general asked cautiously. Lei Zhenting lowered his eyes and clenched his fists under the table. He said in a deep voice, "We can't care about that now. Tomorrow morning, we will turn around and lead our troops south." Prince. Then the West Hill. After all, they were all generals of the West Hill. It was impossible for them to remain indifferent when they knew that the West Hill might be occupied by the Mahist army. They looked at Lei Zhenting with a troubled expression. Lei Zhenting frowned and said in a deep voice, "We have been tricked by Mo Xiuyao. Mo Xiuyao cannot attack the Dechu state. That is why he led us to attack the Dechu state while he took the opportunity to attack the West Hill. We can't go back now. Once we are entangled with Lu Jingxian's army for too long, Murongxin and the Dechu state troops behind him will pounce on us and surround us from 3 sides. When that happens, it is unknown how many of us will be able to return to the West Hill." Everyone's expression turned ugly. "Prince, what should we do?" Lei Zhenting said indifferently, "Since we can't go back, then, we have to go forward. We have to go all the way south and conquer the south of the Dechu state. Now that Murongxin is going north, we can go south and avoid him. At that time, the worst-case scenario would be us defending the Yunlan River and ruling with the Dechu state. In the short term, the Dechu state does not have the ability to go south and fight with us. The northern region and the northern tribes in the north are enough to keep them busy. In addition, Mo Xiuyao will not be able to take over all the land in the West Hill in the short term. At most, he will withdraw his troops when we reach the capital. At that time, we will still be able to coordinate with the West Hill. If Tingfing can control the situation in the West Hill." Everyone was silent. No one asked what would happen if the Crown Prince could not control the situation. At least Lei Zhenting had given them a seemingly good way out. Occupying the Jiangnan of the Dechu state, that rich and populous land, was something they had dreamed of obtaining. It was also the reason why they had been in constant conflict with the Dechu state for the past 100 years. They were clearly of the same origin. Why should the Dechu state have such a prosperous and populous land, while they could only suffer the cold wind and dust in the northwest? Everyone exchanged glances and whispered for a moment. Finally, they said in unison, "We obey the prince's orders." Lei Zhenting nodded in satisfaction. Although he had accidentally fallen into Mo Xiuyao's trap this time, he knew in his heart that even if he had to do it again, he would still choose to do the same. With Mo Xiuyao and the Mahist army in the northwest, they could only take risks if they wanted to change the previous situation. And the land in the West Hill was too barren compared to the Dechu state. "Now, Deputy General, I will give you 300,000 soldiers and horses. Go north and join forces with the northern tribes to attack the Feihong Pass. The rest of you will follow I to the south." After organizing his thoughts, Lei Zhenting quickly issued the order. The deputy general was stunned and said with some confusion, "Prince, if we provoke the Prince Ding mansion now, isn't it a little?" Lei Zhenting snorted softly and said, "Don't worry. We don't really need to break through Feihong Pass. We just need to make it look like we are attacking by force. After I lead the troops to the south, don't let Lu Jingxian have the time to come and cause trouble for I." The deputy general then understood Lei Zhenting's thoughts. He couldn't help but ask, "If we attack Feihong Pass, will Lu Jingxian come back to help? If so, we can break through the blockade of the Mahist army and go back to the West Hill to help." Lei Zhenting shook his head and said, "Lu Jingxian is not that stupid. If we go back to the West Hill, he will only stop us at all costs. But if we go south..." In his opinion, the northwest is much more important than Jiangnan, which belongs to Mo Jingli. The deputy general surrendered. "Prince is wise. I did not think it through. I accept the order." Lei Zhenting nodded and said, "Go. Remember not to act rashly." I have already sent people to contact the general of the northern tribes. There should be news soon. After the northern tribes and the northwest Mahist army start fighting, you can act according to the situation. I accept the order. After dismissing the generals, Enchanting looked at the northwest in a daze. After a long time, he sneered and said, "Mo Xiaoyao, this time you have one half around. But after I take Jiangnan." Chapter 680. Mo Jingli was the first to know about Genom of Gojoseon's movements. No matter how stupid Mo Jingli was, he still remembered that Jiangnan was the capital that allowed him to settle down. Moreover, Mo Jingli was never a true idiot. He was just not smart enough compared to some people. Therefore, the moment he received news of Genom of Gojoseon's movements, Mo Jingli ordered Murong-shin, who was leading troops north, to stop Genom of Gojoseon from going south. Murong-shin had led troops north because the troops in the north had been badly beaten up by Genom of Gojoseon. He had originally come to settle accounts with Enchanting. Naturally, he did not care where he would settle accounts with him. After receiving Mo Jingli's order, he immediately led the army that was originally heading north to the southeast. He wanted to block the front of the Shiling army. Even after making these plans, Mo Jingli still could not be at ease. He secretly ordered his confidants to secretly prepare to move the capital to the south. He completely did not think about the lives of the soldiers who were still fighting the north and the northern tribes. However, Mo Jingli's actions were not truly hidden from everyone. Very quickly, a secret letter was sent to Zijing Pass in the northeast of the Chu capital. At Zijing Pass, the battles that were getting more and more difficult by the day caused Leng Huai to grow much older and thinner in the past month. The army in the north seemed to know that the Dechu state was an arrow at the end of its flight. Ever since the northern tribes entered the pass, they began to attack even more crazily. Leng Huai had reason to believe that the northern tribes had secretly colluded long ago. However, the rations that the Chu capital sent to Zijing Pass were decreasing by the day. Ever since the new emperor ascended the throne, the rations for this month had been delayed for 10 days and still had not arrived. If there was still no rations after 10 days, the Dechu state would lose without a fight even if the northern tribes did not attack. "Father, what's the matter?" Leng Haoyu, who was suddenly called into the study, looked at his old father with a leisurely and unruly expression, as if he couldn't understand where his father's worries came from. Leng Huai was infuriated by his calm demeanor. He didn't know when it started, but this son of his had always acted like he didn't care about anything even if the sky fell down. Although Leng Huai already knew that Leng Haoyu wasn't really that kind of playboy, he still couldn't help but want to get angry when he saw him like this. "What's with the grin on your face?" Leng Huai said in a deep voice. Leng Haoyu pursed his lips. Could it be that he wanted to be like eldest Leng, who had a sullen face all day long, as if someone owed him millions of taels of silver? Rolling his eyes, Leng Haoyu said, "Father, what's the matter?" "I'm going to accompany Ting, to play." Leng Huai's veins on his forehead throbbed. "Play? What time is it now? You still have time to play with your wife. What's wrong with your wife? You're not sensible, and she's not sensible either. She's always fooling around." Leng Haoyu didn't care if he was criticized, but it was not okay if his wife was criticized. Leng Haoyu said unhappily, "What's wrong with my wife? She can take care of the family, have children, do business with me, and accompany me to the battlefield. Even if she's not as good as Princess Ding, she's not bad. Can your wife do it? Can your eldest daughter-in-law do it?" As he spoke, Leng Haoyu gradually became complacent, as if he felt that his wife was really very good. Leng Huai couldn't help but twitch the corner of his mouth when he saw him like this. He said helplessly, "I didn't call you here to hear you brag about your wife." "Am I bragging?" "I'm telling the truth, okay?" Leng Haoyu muttered in a low voice in dissatisfaction. He thought to himself, wasn't it you who started it? Why didn't you say it earlier? What's the matter? Father, just say it. Ling Huai frowned and said in a deep voice, what happened in the capital? Don't say you don't know. I know you have another source of information. Leng Haoyu couldn't help but smile at him. He raised his head and asked, then father, do you know where my source of information came from? Do you really want to use it? If you use it, what will you use to return it? This. Ling Huai was speechless, although Leng Haoyu never said anything. However, Leng Haoyu didn't deliberately hide anything from him in the past few months. He more or less guessed what his son had been doing all these years. Although he was shocked and angry at his son's boldness and recklessness, on the other hand, as a father, he also felt proud and relieved that his son could have such ability and achievements without the help of his family. Leng Haoyu wasn't in a hurry. He smiled and waited for his father to make a decision. After a long while, Ling Huai glared at him angrily and said, "You're my son. As a father, do I have to pay for asking you for information?" Leng Haoyu raised his eyebrows and looked at him with some ridicule. He didn't make things difficult and shrugged, actually, it's nothing. Genom of Gojosian's road back to Xiling was cut off by Prince Ding. He planned to abandon his hometown and go to Jiangnan to snatch Prince Li's territory. Of course, Prince Li wasn't willing to give up his territory so easily, so he was secretly preparing to return to Jiangnan. If he wants to return to Jiangnan, he naturally has to bring many things and even military forces back. How would he have the time to care about your small Zijing Pass? Anyway, Prince Li isn't the emperor. Even if the capital is gone, there's still the prosperous land of Jiangnan. It's not a loss to him. What? Leng Haoyu said it casually, but Leng Huai's face turned pale when he heard it. How is that possible? Doesn't Prince Li know that once the capital is lost, more than half of the Dechu state will be finished? Leng Haoyu raised his eyebrows and said, "Why are you asking me if you don't believe me? So what if Prince Li doesn't give up? The northern tribes have already entered the pass. It won't be long before they attack the Chu capital. When that time comes, can your Zijing Pass still hold on? If you retreat then, I'm afraid that Mo Jingli won't even be able to keep Jiangnan. Of course, he has to leave first. When he goes to Jiangnan, he doesn't need to be a regent. When the young emperor is killed by the northern tribes or the northern region, he can directly ascend to the throne and become the emperor." Ling Huai was speechless. Although Leng Haoyu's words were crude and unadorned, they undoubtedly hit the nail on the head. But how could he be willing to give up the Zijing Pass that he had defended for so long, especially when he knew the consequences of giving up? Then why did you come? Prince Ding naturally has his own plans for you to come, right? Does Prince Ding really want to watch the Dechu state fall? Since things had reached this point, Ling Huai didn't avoid Leng Haoyu's identity anymore. Leng Haoyu's expression immediately turned ugly. He sneered, "Why did I come? Who asked you to run to the battlefield at such an old age so recklessly? Generally speaking, I wanted to see if I should collect your corpse or Ling Qingyu's. As for Prince Ding, you can give up. Prince Ding is in Xiling right now. Even if he changes his mind, he can't grow wings and fly back." No matter what Mo Xiuyao was thinking, Leng Haoyu appeared here because he was worried that his father would accidentally kill him on the battlefield. He didn't expect the other party to not appreciate it at all. It was no wonder that Leng Haoyu's expression turned ugly. Ling Huai also knew that he had been too anxious and said too much, so he didn't care that Leng Haoyu's words were unpleasant. Looking at his son's ugly expression, he couldn't help but sigh. Forget it. In a few days, bring Ting Er back to the capital. Leng Haoyu raised his eyebrows. What do you mean? Chapter 681. Ling Huai said in annoyance, "You also said that we can't hold on to Zijing Pass anymore. Your elder brother and I are generals of the Dechu state. Dying on the battlefield is something we ought to do. Don't tell me you want to join in the fun. Hurry up and leave while the situation is still better." The Leng family. If you have the ability, take care of the Leng family. Even if he was loyal to the Dechu state and the imperial family, he didn't really plan on sacrificing all of his sons. Ling Huai wasn't a subject of the Dechu state to begin with. Ling Huai naturally had him leave without any pressure. Leng Haoyu didn't appreciate this kindness. He rolled his eyes and said, "Take care of your wife, son, and grandson yourself. I begged the prince not to come to Zijing Pass to collect your corpse." Leng Haoyu silently complained in his heart. Ling Huai only thought that he had a knot in his heart about the Leng family. He shook his head helplessly and said, "Fine, everyone has their own fate. It's up to you." Leng Haoyu frowned and looked at Ling Huai. "Have you never thought of retreating? Do you really plan on letting these hundreds of thousands of soldiers die with you in Zijing Pass?" Ling Huai smiled bitterly. "Retreat? Retreat to where? Behind us is the Chu capital. We can retreat, but where can these ordinary people retreat to? This old man hasn't fought any earth-shattering battles in my life, but I've never been a coward who abandoned a city and fled." Leng Haoyu could only roll his eyes and wave his hand. "Fine, I don't care about you. You don't care about me either. When it's time to leave, I'll naturally leave." If it really came down to it, he would knock this old man unconscious and bring him to the northwest. Although he didn't like this old man, he didn't plan on sending his father to his death so early. What's more, His Highness wanted a general who could fight. And he was just over 50 years old. He wasn't that old. He could still lead soldiers for a few more years. Ling Huai felt very uncomfortable under his son's strange gaze, but he couldn't guess what he was thinking. She could only wave her hand to dismiss him. On the other hand, Ling Huai was still holding the fort at Redbud Pass, temporarily blocking the advance of the Northern Army. On the other hand, it was not so easy. Most of the Northern Tribe's soldiers were cavalry. Furthermore, the weather outside the Great Pass was already bad. The Northern Tribe's soldiers were much more ferocious than the Dechu state soldiers. Even their warhorses were the best in the world. In terms of cavalry, only the Mahist Army's Black Cloud Cavalry could compare to the Northern Tribes. However, the Black Cloud Cavalry was much smaller than the Northern Tribes. Moreover, the Black Cloud Cavalry was good at long-distance raids, leaving after one attack. Even if they were to face the Northern Tribes, they might not be able to defeat them. Thus, it was not hard to imagine what would happen after the hundreds of thousands of Northern Tribes' cavalrymen entered the pass. The Northern Tribes were slightly different from the Northern Tribes. Although the Northern Tribes were mostly barbarians, Ren Qining, or Lin Yuan, was from the Central Plains. He had also recruited many capable people from the Central Plains. He also knew that what he wanted to do was to rule the Central Plains, not destroy it. Thus, even though the Northern Tribe's army could not be said to be invincible, there would not be any large-scale massacres. However, the Northern Tribes were different. The Northern Tribes were completely nomadic people. They killed their way into the Central Plains in order to take over the fertile land and rich resources for themselves. Thus, when faced with the people of Dechu state who originally had these resources, they would naturally kill them mercilessly. Wherever the Northern Tribe's army went, there would be cries of misery and blood flowing like rivers. Most of the people along the way would die. The atmosphere in the regent's residence in the Chu capital was heavy. Du Qua glared at the calm Mo Jingli in front of him with wide eyes. Du Qua's idea of guarding the border was not realized in the end. It was not that Mo Jingli did not believe in Du Qua's ability, but he was also wary of Du Qua like Mo Jingqi. Although no one said it on the surface, Mo Jingli knew where the missing empress had gone. He naturally had reason to believe that Du Kuo's residents had already found a place for him to retreat. He was worried that Du Kuo would lead the Dechu state army to the northwest. Prince, the northern tribe's army has already entered the pass. The northern tribe's army is also pressing in. Why is Prince still unwilling to give the provisions to General Leng? Du Kuo asked sternly. Mo Jingli's eyes flashed with a trace of surprise. He said calmly, "Old Duke, you are very well informed." Du Kuo snorted and said calmly, "I have been on the battlefield for half my life. I still have 2 old friends in the army." Although the Hua family and Linghuai family did not get along well, Linghuai had spent some time under Du Kuo's command when he first entered the battlefield. Therefore, it was not strange for Du Kuo to ask now. Mo Jingli of course did not believe Du Kuo's words, but he did not show it. He only said calmly, "Old Duke, you should know that since the Mahist army broke off relations with the Dechu state, the north will not be able to withstand it sooner or later." Speaking of this, Mo Jingli was not depressed. Even if he was not the emperor, he was the actual ruler of the Dechu state. No one in power would be willing to see their territory being invaded. However, this was the reality and he had to admit it. Du Kuo sneered and said, "Without provisions and without reinforcements, they will not be able to hold on. I know that King Li's base is in the south. When he heard that the West Hill Regent is sending troops south, he is naturally anxious." Du Kuo. Mo Jingli's face flashed with anger. He said in a low voice, "Du Kuo, please be careful with your words." Du Kuo did not back down at all. "Am I wrong? The prince embezzled Linghuai's provisions and did not give any reinforcements to the north. Is it not because he wants to go south?" Mo Jingli's eyes flashed with embarrassment. He said angrily, "The south is more important than the north. If Jiangnan is also occupied by Enchanting, the north will not be able to withstand it. What should we do if we are sandwiched in the middle and attacked from both sides?" All of this is caused by Mo Xiuyao. If he did not run to attack the West Hill and block Enchanting's escape route, why would Enchanting turn his attention to Jiangnan? Hearing this, Du Kuo looked calmly at Mo Jingli as if he was looking at an ignorant child. Mo Jingli also understood that he was being unreasonable. The Prince Ding mansion had clearly broken off relations with the Dechu state. Whether it was Mo Xiuyao attacking the West Hill or cutting off Enchanting's escape route, it was all for his own benefit. It was none of Mo Xiuyao's business whose interests would be harmed in this. As a person in power, he would not value the benefits of others more than his own. In addition, if the Dechu state did not disappoint, they could work together with the Prince Ding mansion to trap Enchanting. It was their own incompetence that allowed Enchanting to lead his troops south and sweep everything before him. However, Mo Jingli could not help but want to vent his anger. If it were not for Mo Xiuyao, there would not be so many problems. After gathering his thoughts, Mo Jingli did not want to continue discussing who was right and who was wrong with Du Kuo. Most of the old people in court were biased towards the Prince Ding mansion. Even now that the Prince Ding mansion had abandoned the Dechu state and brought great disaster to the Dechu state, these people would still speak up for Mo Xiuyao. This situation made Mo Jingli jealous, hateful, and helpless. "Husband Hua, you didn't come to I's residence just to discuss this matter with I, right?" Mo Jingli put on an indifferent expression and asked. Chapter 682. Du Kuo glanced at him. Things had already come to this point. He was not here to discuss the issue of military supplies. Was he here to drink tea with him? Mo Jingli said, "Actually, old Duke does not need to worry about these matters. Naturally, the officials in the court will take care of it." "Does old Duke think that all the officials in the court are useless?" Du Kuo sneered. Mo Jingli had not learned any skills in these few years, but he had learned to speak in a bureaucratic manner. The officials in the court were indeed not useless, but none of them had solved the problem at the border. Like King Li, there were quite a few people who were secretly packing up their belongings and preparing to head south. Du Qua looked at Mo Jingli and said in a low voice, "Since the northern tribes entered the pass, they have killed many people. The areas that were invaded by the northern tribes have been filled with crimson corpses. I wonder if Prince has heard of this." Mo Jingli was taken aback and nodded, "I have heard of it. However, the rumors are not true." "Old Duke, you are thinking too much." Du Qua was so angry that he laughed. "Rumors? Not true. I do not believe that King Li does not know whether it is a rumor or not. After the Chu capital, the road to the south is flat. Do I know where King Li plans to retreat to? To the south of the Yunlon River. The northern tribes are not good at water battles. This is a good idea. However, I would like to ask, where does King Li place the millions of people in the north of Dechu state?" Seeing that Mo Jingli was silent, Du Qua's old face was filled with sorrow. He looked at Mo Jingli with pain and said, "King Li, those people who were killed are the people of Dechu state. They are your Mo family's people." Mo Jingli's face was gloomy. He stared at Du Qua and said, "Du Qua, are you criticizing I?" Du Qua smiled bitterly and said, "How can this old man dare to criticize the regent? I only remember that the regent Mo Lufang said one thing, the one who wins the people's hearts wins the world. His Highness Prince Li treats his own people as objects that can be casually thrown away, so how can you expect them to be loyal to you? When the Prince Regent first took over, the situation in Dechu state wasn't much better than it is now." "Enough." Mo Jingli rudely interrupted Du Qua's words. Du Qua's earnest advice sounded more like sarcasm in his ears. Coldly looking at the old man in front of him, Mo Jingli sneered, "I don't have the ability of Mo Xiuyao and Mo Lufang, but so what? Do you want I to invite Mo Xiuyao back for you, or do you want I to ask His Majesty to abdicate the throne to Mo Xiuyao?" Du Qua was so angry that his entire body trembled. If the previous emperor could be considered a scheming and ambitious person, then Mo Jingli and the Mo brothers were the oddities of the Mo family. They were already in such a situation, yet they still refused to reflect on themselves, and instead pushed the blame onto others. With such a descendant, Dechu state was truly finished, wasn't it? Du Qua took a few deep breaths, calming the anger in his heart. Finally, he stood up and said, "Fine, Prince Li won't listen to this old man's words, so this old man won't bother you anymore. I ask Prince Li to quickly transfer rations and reinforcements to support the northern and northern tribes' front lines." Du Qua swallowed his anger, but Mo Jingli's anger had not completely dissipated. He coldly looked at Du Qua and said, "Du Qua, I remember that you've already retired from your position for a long time. Whether or not you transfer rations, whether or not you give reinforcements, and when you give them is up to I, Du Qua, you should return to your residence and rest. Perhaps in a few days, we'll have to leave for the south. If something happens to Du Qua along the way, I won't be able to explain it to the Hua family. This old man will not leave the capital," Du Qua said firmly. Mo Jingli did not care. Whether Du Qua wanted to leave the capital or not was not up to him to decide. Although Du Qua had not led troops for many years, he still had many old friends in the army. Mo Jingli would definitely not let him stay in the capital. Rather than letting Mo Xiuyao take advantage of him, he would rather give the capital to the northern tribes and the northern tribes. As for Du Qua's wishes, they were completely out of Mo Jingli's consideration. If Du Qua really did not want to cooperate, he did not mind using force. Prince Li. How could Du Qua not see through Mo Jingli's plan? Not only his plan, but Du Qua could also guess what he was thinking. It was because of this that he felt even more upset. With Mo Jingli's temperament, let alone in this chaotic world. Even in a peaceful time, he was not suitable to be a ruler. Du Qua composed himself and said in a low voice, "This old man will definitely not leave the capital. If Prince Ding insists, why don't you try to bring this old man's corpse out of the capital?" Mo Jinglei frowned in displeasure. Although he did not like Du Qua very much, Du Qua was still one of the 4 officials in the capital. However, since Du Qua was the only old official in the capital who had experienced 4 dynasties, he did not dare to force Du Qua to his death. Moreover, persuading those old fellows to agree to move the capital was also a big matter. If Du Qua openly opposed it, many of the old officials would not agree. He frowned and said, "Du Qua, I am doing this for your own good. You're already so old, why don't you go to Jiangnan and enjoy your old age? As for the capital, one day, we will return." Du Qua laughed coldly, "Enjoy my old age. When I dream of those innocent people crying, this old man can't sleep. I can't sleep. This old man has lived long enough. I vow to live and die with the capital." Mo Jinglei stood up angrily. He stared at Du Qua for a while before coldly saying, "I will not give you a single soldier." Then he flicked his sleeves and left. Du Qua was left sitting in the parlor in a daze. Finally, he looked up to the sky and sighed, "Idiot. Dichu State has such an idiot." A line of old tears rolled down his wrinkled face. Looking at the regent's residence that was resplendent and richly decorated, he could only slowly stand up and walk out. Dichu State is finished. Chapter 683. Half a month later, the regent of Dichu State, Mo Jinglei, brought the Empress Dowager, the new emperor, and most of the court officials south to Jiangnan. Those who remained in the capital were the old court officials led by Du Qua and a portion of the civil officials. When the soldiers on the front lines received this news, their morale instantly collapsed. The battle that was not optimistic to begin with was a complete failure. The northern tribes' army continued to push south. 10 days later, the Zijing Pass that had held out for months was finally broken. Large amounts of northern soldiers poured into the pass. At this time, when Mo Xiuyao, who was far away in Xiling, received the news, the Mahist army had already reached the emperor of Xiling City. In the previous battle of Feng City, with the lessons learned and sharpened in Bian City, the performance of Qin Yun and the other young generals was rather outstanding. Although Lei Dingfeng was rescued by the gold-robed guards in the end, the flaws could not obscure the beauty of the jade. The Mo family army continued to push forward, and after several months of continuous battles, this group of soldiers that originally did not have much experience had become the true elite soldiers of the Mo family army. When the Mahist army reached the emperor of Xiling City, it was already the 9th month. After surrounding the emperor of Xiling City, Mo Xiuyao did not immediately give the order to attack. He only surrounded but did not attack. He took the opportunity to let the soldiers who had been tired for months rest. At this time, in the Emperor of Shiling's palace, the Emperor of Xiling was frowning deeply as he looked at the white-robed youth in front of him. Below the Emperor of Xiling, the cultured and elegant Su Qingbai also smiled as he sized up the Emperor of Xiling in front of him. The Emperor of Xiling was only in his early 50s, but compared to Genom of Gojoseon who had lost an arm but still had a grand presence, he was not very presentable. Maybe it was because of years of singing and dancing that he was extremely thin. His face was sallow and his eyes were murky. Even his eyelids drooped loosely. He was not old, but he looked lifeless. Su Qingbai did not care as he looked at the Emperor of Shiling's palace guards who were staring at him. In reality, he had been in Xiling for many days, but the Emperor of Xiling did not plan to see him at first. Maybe the Emperor of Xiling did not think that his Xiling army would be so weak in front of the Mahist army. It was only when the Mahist army took Bian City and Feng City in less than half a month's time did he truly start to worry. However, this negotiation, which was related to the fate of the nation, was not so easy to resolve. In addition, the Emperor Shiling's palace guards were, so his attitude was indecisive. Now that the Mo family army was at the city gates and there was no news from the Lord of Jinnan's residence, he could not afford to hesitate any longer. In the northwest, Su Qingbai had been involved in farming in extremely barren areas for many years. However, this didn't erase his innate scholarly aura. In fact, after a few years, he had become even gentler and gentler than before. Compared to the Su family who had different personalities, Su Qingbai was the successor of the Su family's century-old scholarly reputation. He was truly talented. Compared to him, Su Qingchen was too otherworldly, Su Qingzhou was too cold, Su Qingfeng was more like a warrior, and Su Qingyan was too lively. Only Su Qingbai had a gentle expression and an indifferent smile. He was a real gentleman and no one could hate him. "What do you think, Emperor of Xiling?" Su Qingbai asked indifferently after a long time. The Emperor of Xiling did not relax because of Su Qingbai's gentle attitude. He still frowned and looked like he was in a difficult position. Su Qingbai said slowly, "Actually, why does the Emperor of Xiling have to be so difficult?" The Prince Ding mansion did not mean to make things difficult for the Emperor of Xiling. "We have no other choice." Everyone present, including the Qi Lin guards who were standing at the door and staring at the guards in the hall, was speechless. They had already attacked the capital, but they did not want to make things difficult. What would be considered as making things difficult? Seeing the Emperor of Shiling's disbelieving expression, Su Qingbai smiled and said, "If not for Genom of Gojoseon's ambition to attack the Dechu state, our Prince Ding mansion would not have made things difficult for the Emperor of Xiling." The Emperor of Xiling frowned and said, "As far as I know, the Mahist army has already cut ties with Eastern Chu. Fourth young Master Su, please do not use these words to fool me. Even if he was a puppet, he was still an emperor." Su Qingbai using these words to fool him was simply mocking his intelligence. Su Qingbai did not mind and shook his head helplessly. "Although our Prince Ding mansion has no intention of interfering in the affairs of the Dechu state, the Emperor of Xiling should also know that the northwest is small and barren. If Genom of Gojoseon were to take over the Dechu state, with Genom of Gojoseon's ambition, would he not make things difficult for the Prince Ding mansion?" The Emperor of Xiling was silent. Su Qingbai's words had somewhat convinced him. In reality, he also understood that Su Qingbai's words were mostly sophistry. However, under these circumstances, people were far more likely to accept such sophistry than usual. Therefore, the Emperor of Xiling could not help but think that if Genom of Gojoseon had not attacked the Dechu state, would Imo Xiuyao not have attacked Xiling? Most importantly, Enchanting attacking the Dechu state was one thing, but he had actually taken away Xiling's most elite troops and horses. When Xiling was in danger, he did not even consider coming back to help. Instead, he continued to attack the Dechu state. This matter made the Emperor of Xiling very unhappy. Seeing the Emperor of Xiling silence, Su Qingbai continued, "The Emperor of Xiling must also understand that with Xiling's current military strength, the imperial city will definitely not be able to be defended. Moreover, even if the Prince Ding mansion retreats now, can the Emperor of Xiling withstand the military strength of the various countries in the western region? As far as I know, the small countries in the western region have already formed an alliance of 15 countries, leading 600,000 troops to the border. They want to take revenge for the blood debt of the Xiling army in the western region in the past." Hearing this, the Emperor of Xiling could not help but tremble. How many people had Long Yang killed in the western region back then? It was impossible to count. In the past hundreds of years, many people in the western region had lived under Xiling's tyranny. It could be said that the hatred between them and Xiling was as deep as the sea. However, Xiling's military strength had always been strong, so these small countries could only swallow their anger. However, enduring silently did not mean that they were willing to submit. Shilin had just been defeated by the Mahist army, and these small countries were already ready to make a move. The Shilin emperor knew that he would never be able to defeat Mo Xiuyao, nor would he be able to deal with the countries of the western regions who hated the Shilin emperor. Just like how he always knew that he could not defeat his younger brother, Genom of Gojoseon, he had always been very sensible. After a long while, the emperor of Shilin finally spoke. Fourth young master Su, what do you want to say? Su Qingbai raised his eyebrows slightly, knowing that the emperor of Shilin was shocked and relaxed. He smiled faintly and said, as long as the emperor of Shilin gives up the emperor of Shilin city, all the cities that the Mahist army had previously taken over will belong to the northwest. The Mahist army will immediately withdraw. Isn't it good for both sides to coexist peacefully? The emperor of Shilin almost spat out a mouthful of blood. Coexist peacefully. The Mahist army had taken over 1/3 of Shilin's territory, and now he was talking about coexisting peacefully with him. The emperor of Shilin shook his head and said, the imperial city is out of the question. As long as Prince Ding withdraws his troops immediately, the land that the Mahist army had previously occupied can be given to the Prince Ding mansion. In addition, I can also add in the Qingyang province. The Qingyang province borders the Dechu state, and its area is twice the size of the Anping province where the imperial city is located. The imperial city was the capital and foundation of Shilin. If he lost the imperial city, how could he continue to be an emperor? Would he have to follow the example of the Dechu state's emperor? Chapter 684. Speaking of which, Shilin and the Dechu state were indeed of the same origin. Back then, the cavalry rebelled against the previous dynasty and established a country not long after. After that, Shilin became strong, and so did the Dechu state. The Dechu state was in chaos, and so was Shilin. For 100 or 200 years, no one gained any advantage over the other. Now, the new emperor of the Dechu state could not escape, and the emperor of Shilin city was also under siege. Su Qingbai waved his fan and shook his head. Emperor of Shilin, does the city of Shilin really mean anything to you? The so-called imperial city is the place of the emperor. As long as the emperor is still around, where can't the imperial city be built? In this situation, even if the imperial city is saved, can you really live in peace? The emperor of Shilin was silent. At the same time, he could not help but blame his ancestor for choosing the wrong location for the imperial city. The emperor of Shilin city was less than 600 or 700 miles away from the borders of the western region. In the past, when Shilin was strong, it was easy to ask for rare tributes from the small countries of the western region, such as beautiful women and rare horses. But once Shilin declined, the cavalry of the western region countries could even reach the imperial city in a few days. Moreover, in the future, he would have to live next to the Mahist army. The emperor of Shilin felt like he was sitting on pins and needles whenever he thought about it. After being reminded by Su Qingbai, the emperor of Shilin suddenly felt that the imperial city was a little difficult to handle. He did not want to face the strong Mahist army in front of him, and then face the western region countries who were eyeing him covetously. But the emperor of Shilin could not bring himself to give away the imperial city so easily. How could Su Qingbai not understand his thoughts? He was not in a hurry. He smiled faintly and said, "It's okay. Emperor of Shilin, why don't you think about it carefully for a few days? Of course, if our two armies can settle peacefully, the Prince Ding mansion will not take the Emperor of Shilin city for free." Such a clear hint made the Emperor of Shilin's heart move, and he looked at Su Qingbai questioningly. Su Qingbai smiled faintly and said, "The Emperor of Shilin's family has always been suppressed by Genom of Gojoseon. If Genom of Gojoseon had not eliminated dissidents, how would the three famous generals of Shilin have declined? If Shilin and the Prince Ding mansion live peacefully together, they would naturally be friends. Isn't it normal for friends to support each other? The Emperor of Shiling's eyes lit up. No matter how capable he was still an emperor and a man. As an emperor, if he didn't have the slightest desire for power, then he wouldn't be sitting in this position. The price that Su Qingbai offered was undoubtedly very attractive. If the Prince Ding mansion helped him suppress Enchanting, then he could control the court and become the real emperor of Shiling. So what if Shiling was only left with 2/3 of its territory? Wasn't he just as powerless now? He was not even as free as an ordinary marquis. Su Qingbai understood that going too far was as bad as falling short, so he did not say anything more. He stood up leisurely and said goodbye to the Emperor of Shiling, leaving him some time to think. Before he left, he did not forget to say, "Your Majesty, it is not your fault that Shiling is like this." Watching Su Qingbai leave calmly, the Emperor of Shiling could not help but feel a little absent-minded and jealous. Even if Su Qingbai was just a young man who did not even have a formal official title. But the bearing and ease he showed in front of him, the emperor of a country, made him jealous. At the same time, Su Qingbai's last words were deeply imprinted in his mind. Yes, it was not his fault. It was really Enchanting's fault. Your Majesty. The chamberlain beside him came forward to serve him hot tea and said carefully. The Emperor of Shiling lowered his head and took a sip of the tribute tea he was used to drinking. Only then did he let out a long sigh of relief and asked casually, "Do you think the imperial city can be defended? Your Majesty is wise and mighty. Shiling will live for 1,000 years. Of course, we can defend it." The chamberlain said respectfully, although he did not believe what he said. Fortunately, the Emperor of Shiling did not mean to question whether his words were true or not. He nodded silently and said, "Fine, let's wait and see." The chamberlain silently waited on the side. He was someone who served the Emperor of Shiling all year round. Just by looking at his expression, he could guess the Emperor of Shiling's intentions. This time was no exception. But he was only a small chamberlain. It was not his place to say much about the matters of the country. In the large tent of the Mahist army outside the imperial city, all the generals of the Mahist army gathered and discussed. The Mahist army had attacked the Emperor of Shiling city like a hot knife through butter. But the prince ordered them to only surround and not attack. This made many generals puzzled. Shouldn't they take the imperial city while the army was at its peak? Feng San, what are the prince and Wang Fei thinking? Others could not ask, but Zhang Qilan did not mind. He directly asked Feng Zhiyao, who had been with Mo Xiuyao the longest. Feng Zhiyao looked at the top of the tent and rolled his eyes. How would I know what the prince is thinking? I am not a bug in the prince's stomach. A deputy general hesitated and asked, "Is the prince planning to retreat?" With these words, the others did not speak. They naturally knew the news that the Emperor of Dechu State was heading south. Even though they did not want to have any relationship with the imperial house of Dechu State, they did have feelings for the people of Dechu State. Even though they had not seen the situation in Dechu State with their own eyes, they could guess a bit. So it was hard to avoid guessing if the prince was planning to retreat. Actually, there is nothing wrong with retreating. What if the prince wants to reinforce the Dechu State? Someone asked hesitantly. After all, they were of the same origin as the people of Dechu State. Most of the people in the Mahist army had relatives and friends in Dechu State. If the prince really planned to send troops to Dechu State, no one would object. No matter how much the Mahist army hated the imperial house of Dechu State, it had nothing to do with the commoners. After all, people's hearts were made of flesh. Also, the northern tribes and the Mahist army have a huge grudge. If the prince really plans to do so, we naturally will not object. Back then, the previous Prince Ding, Mo Xiuan, and the tens of thousands of Mahist army soldiers who had died in vain, plus the battle that year, at least 200,000 Mahist army soldiers had died in the hands of the northern tribes. What are you all talking about? Yi Li's elegant voice came from outside the tent. Everyone hurriedly stood up and bowed. Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li walked in hand. There was a faint warmth between their brows. It was obvious that they were in a good mood. Greetings to the prince, princess. Mo Xiaoyao led Yi Li to the main seat and sat down. He raised his brows and smiled at the generals. Princess is asking, what is everyone talking about? Yunting was suddenly pushed forward. He looked around helplessly at his colleagues, who were all looking down their noses. He could only say, reporting to Your Highness, we are all guessing when Your Highness plans to attack the city. Seeing Yunting's serious expression, Yi Li could not help but smile. Don't be nervous, Prince and I are just casually asking. Sit down and talk. Thank you, Princess. Yunting heaved a sigh of relief and hurriedly returned to sit beside Chen Yun. Chapter 685. Mo Xiaoyao looked at the generals below with a smile that wasn't a smile and asked, You all want to know when to attack the city? The generals all nodded. They were anxiously waiting. They were about to attack the Emperor of Xiling City. This was a feat that the Mahist army hadn't achieved in the past 200 years. Mo Xiaoyao looked at them with a smile and said, I don't plan to attack the imperial city. Hearing this, everyone couldn't help but reveal a shocked expression. Although they had some guesses, when they really heard Prince say this, they were still a little surprised. Moreover, if they didn't plan to attack the city, they didn't need to come at all. They could just go back home. Could it be that the Xiling army that was scared of them along the way dared to chase after them? Prince, why don't you attack? Yunting couldn't help but raise his hand and ask. Everyone's gaze immediately turned to Mo Xiaoyao. Mo Xiaoyao asked faintly, to attack Bian City, how many soldiers did the Mahist army lose? Everyone was silent. Although the Mahist army's journey could be said to be a rare success, Bian City still lost many soldiers. However, Bian City still lost a lot of soldiers. Preliminary calculations showed that Bian City had lost close to 80,000 to 90,000 soldiers. It was almost the sum of the losses before and after the battle. Now that the army was near the Emperor of Xiling City, the reason why there were still 300,000 soldiers was because LV Songxian had sent over 100,000 more elite soldiers. These were the Mahist army's most elite soldiers. Mo Xiaoyao said, although the Emperor of Xiling City doesn't have as long a history as Bian City, its defensive capabilities are definitely better than Bian City's. In addition, the last of Ai's three great generals, Shuntian General Feng Ao, is currently in the Imperial City. The Mahist army can indeed attack the Emperor of Xiling City, but I don't want to pay that many losses. In addition, I don't want to destroy the city's defenses. The Imperial City wasn't that old, only about 150 years ago. It was a city that the Xiling Kingdom had spent over 10 years to build. When the West Hill was first established, the kingdoms of the western region were restless. The two founding emperors of West Hill dared to choose a place close to the border as their imperial city. One had to say that they were extraordinarily courageous. Perhaps there was also a hint of warning for future generations to be constantly vigilant. Once the Mahist army took over the entire northern part of Xiling, the former border of Xiling would become the border of the Mahist army. This former imperial city would become the last and most solid defense for the countries of the western region. Then, what does Prince plan to do? We can't just waste time like this or not fight, right? Zhang Qilan asked. Mo Xiaoyao smiled but did not answer. Everyone looked at Yi Li. Yi Li lowered her eyebrows and smiled faintly. There is a saying in the art of war, the best strategy is to attack the enemy's plans. Next is to attack the enemy's allies. Next is to attack the enemy's army. The best strategy is to subdue the enemy without fighting. Everyone was in awe. Princess Consort was really heavenly. Feng Zhiyao touched his nose and thought silently in his heart. Which military book mentioned this? Yun Ting looked at her with admiration. Princess Consort is well read. I have been reading military books for 3 whole months and I still haven't seen it. Ahem. Feng Zhiyao coughed lightly and respectfully asked for advice. Princess Consort means to subdue the enemy without fighting. This. I'm afraid it's not that easy. Even if the Emperor of Xiling was really a fool, the officials of the West Hill Imperial Court would not agree to give up the Imperial City just like that. That was the Imperial City, the capital of a country, not a piece of potato. Yili smiled and said, won't we know if it works later? Zhang Qilan frowned and asked, if we don't attack the city, then, what if there are reinforcements? Mo Xiuyao glanced at him indifferently and said, what do we do? Of course we kill them. Don't worry about the Imperial City. If there are any reinforcements from the Xiling army during this period, kill them all. Everyone then let out a sigh of relief. They still had to fight. However, they would definitely have an advantage in a field battle compared to a siege. We obey. Everyone replied in unison. Feng Zhiyao was deep in thought. Actually, this was also a psychological attack, right? Princess Consort, there is someone outside the camp who came from the Emperor of Xiling City and wants to see you. The guard at the door came in and reported. Mo Xiuyao raised his eyebrows and asked, who is it? The guard said, it's said to be the 4th young master of the Su family. However, he doesn't have a token from the Prince Ding mansion, so... Su Qingbai was different from Su Qingchen and Su Qingze who were often in Glass City. He was also different from Su Qingfeng who was in the army camp. Not many people in the Mahist army knew him. Especially the ordinary soldiers in the lower ranks, there were even fewer people who knew him. Therefore, according to the rules, they still had to come in and report his arrival before letting him into the camp. Yili was delighted when she heard this. 4th brother is here. Mo Xiuyao pulled Yili up and smiled. Since that's the case, let's go out and welcome the 4th young master. I feel that he will bring us good news. Everyone was also curious. Why would the 4th young master of the Su family be in the Emperor of Xiling City? More importantly, what kind of good news would he bring them? When the group walked out of the camp, someone had already come out to welcome Su Qingbai. It was Su Qingfeng, who had gone out for a stroll because he had nothing to do. Su Qingfeng was shocked to see his 4th brother, who was supposed to be planting potatoes in the northwest, mysteriously appear in West Hill. Moreover, he came out of the Imperial City. He pulled Su Qingbai over and examined him for a long time. After confirming that he was not injured at all, he asked, 4th brother, why are you here? Does eldest aunt know? Su Qingbai was in a good mood when faced with his 3rd brother's undisguised relationship. He shook his head and smiled. 3rd brother, seems like you're doing well. Su Qingfeng was in high spirits. He smiled and said, of course, your 3rd brother has made a lot of contributions this time. Qingfeng said that when we go back, he will promote me to the deputy commander of the Qilin. Although Su Qingfeng understood that it was more or less because of his cousin's face. After all, he was not the only commander of the team who had made contributions. However, he also knew that Qingfeng was definitely not someone who could not distinguish between public and private affairs. At least this showed that Qingfeng recognized his ability. Then I have to congratulate you, 3rd brother. Su Qingbai smiled. Su Qingfeng's smile faded. He said, you still haven't told me why you are here. If eldest aunt knows that you came here, she will be scared to death. Su Qingbai smiled helplessly and said, Father and Big Brother both know. When I'm done here, I will also write a letter to tell them that I'm safe. Third brother, I have something to discuss with Li and Prince Ding. Third brother. As they were talking, Yi Li and Imo Xiaoyao had already walked out. Behind them was a large group of people. Su Qingbai could not help but feel a little flattered. How was it? Imo Xiaoyao asked faintly. Fortunately, I didn't disappoint you. Su Qingbai smiled. Chapter 686. After welcoming Su Qingbai into the camp, he dismissed the curious young generals, leaving behind only Feng Zhiyao, Zhang Qilan, and the others. Only then did the large tent become quiet again. Feng Zhiyao looked curiously at Su Qingbai and said, Fourth young master Su, when did you arrive in Xiling? We didn't know anything about it. Su Qingbai smiled at Yi Li, who was looking at him, and said, I've been here for a few days. I originally thought that you would take a few more days to arrive. When he said this, Feng Zhiyao and the others understood that Su Qingbai had most likely been secretly sent to the Emperor of Xiling by the prince and Wang Fei. As for why he had come, looking at Su Qingbai's gentle and elegant smile, Feng Zhiyao's eyes flashed with understanding. Fourth brother, did you suffer any grievances these days? Although Yi Li saw that Su Qingbai was safe and sound, she felt much more at ease. But she was still worried that fourth brother had suffered some grievances in Xiling. After all, the people of Xiling didn't have the saying that the Dechu state treated scholars well. Before the Mahist army arrived, the people of Xiling probably wouldn't have been so polite to fourth brother. Su Qingbai smiled and comforted her. It's nothing. We just didn't talk much in Xiling. Now that you've arrived early, things will be much smoother. Imo Xiaoyao drank tea and stared patiently at Yi Li and Su Qingbai. After the greetings were over, he asked, Does the Emperor of Xiling have any plans? Su Qingbai nodded and said, Yesterday, I saw the Emperor of Xiling again. The pressure of the army is great for him. And the conditions we offered are enough for him to be tempted. But I'm afraid that he can't bring himself to give up the imperial city. I'm afraid that we will have to fight 2 more battles. The reinforcements from various places should have arrived in the next few days. I think that if we beat back 2 of them, he will give the order to awaken. Imo Xiaoyao nodded. I understand. Thank you for your hard work. Su Qingbai smiled and said, It's my duty. How is it hard? Only then did Zhang Qilan recover his wits. He looked at Su Qingbai with a dumbfounded expression. After a while, he said, Prince means that we don't need to attack the imperial city. Fourth young master Su persuaded the Emperor of Xiling to give us the imperial city. Zhang Qilan looked at Su Qingbai as if he was looking at a monster. Su Qingbai smiled humbly and said, It's not for free. Naturally, we have to compensate him with something. Zhang Qilan waved his hand and said, This is the imperial city of the Western Tomb. Even if we replenish anything, we'll still benefit from it. Fourth young master Su has such ability at such a young age. I've heard that the Su family's second young master Su was able to battle a group of scholars when he was in his teens. Now, it seems that fourth young master Su has surpassed him. And we need this road to connect the countries in the western region, and even further places. Feng Zhiyao clapped his hands and said with a smile, I understand. After taking these places, the Prince Ding Mansion's area of control will be able to directly connect the countries in the western region. In the future, if we want to trade with the western region, we won't have to worry about being cut off by the West Hill. The Northwest is poor in resources, but it can definitely become a trade route that connects the countries in the East and West. Moreover, with this kind of terrain, we can advance and retreat, attack and defend. Mo Xiuyao nodded and praised, Feng San is right. Zhang Qilan nodded and said, I see. Since there are so many benefits, we naturally have to take the city of the Emperor of Xiling. After Su Qingbai told Yili and the others about the past 2 months and discussed some matters regarding the negotiations with the Emperor of Xiling, he got up and prepared to return to the city. Yili said with some worry, Fourth brother, you should stay in the barracks. If the Emperor of Xiling suddenly goes back on his word. Although the possibility wasn't high, it wasn't completely impossible. Yili didn't want any harm to come to her fourth brother. Su Qingbai patted Yili's shoulder with a smile and said, Don't worry, nothing will happen. Moreover, if I, the envoy for the negotiations, run away first, the Emperor of Xiling won't believe in our sincerity. But Yili was still worried. Su Qingbai smiled and said, As long as the envoys know their limits, they won't be in any danger. Moreover, we obviously have the upper hand now. What's the point of the Emperor of Xiling harming me? At most, it's to vent his anger. He was able to endure under Genom of Gojoseon for so many years, so he won't be such a hot-blooded person. Don't worry. Fourth brother will go back first. Yili thought for a moment and said, I'll ask third brother to bring some people back with you. Su Qingbai had no choice but to agree, hoping that she wouldn't worry. He nodded and said, That's fine, but there can't be too many people. Yili nodded and quickly asked Zhuo Jing to invite Su Qingfeng. Chapter 687. Su Qingfeng was naturally more than happy to accompany Su Qingbai to the imperial city. Even though they were only cousins, the relationship between the 5 brothers of the Su family had always been deeper than that of real brothers. Su Qingfeng was also worried about his 4th brother, who had always been gentle and polite. When Yili said this, Su Qingfeng immediately agreed without even thinking about it. He picked his 6th brother, Qi Lin, from his subordinates to follow Su Qingbai back to the imperial city. As Su Qingbai expected, the Emperor of Xiling persisted for a few more days. 5 days later, after the Mahist army consecutively defeated 2 groups of Xiling army reinforcements to the imperial city, the Emperor of Xiling finally couldn't help but summon Su Qingbai again. No one knew what Su Qingbai said to the Emperor of Xiling. That day, the Emperor of Xiling issued an imperial edict to the world. The war between the Prince Ding Mansion and the West Hill was caused by Lei Jinting of Genom of Gojoseon sending troops to attack the Dechu state without permission. After that, not only did Genom of Gojoseon not return to help, but he also continued to send troops south to attack the south of the Dechu state. As a result, the imperial city was now under siege. The Emperor of Xiling empathized with the suffering of the people and the soldiers of the West Hill and negotiated peace with the Prince Ding Mansion. He seated Anping, Lingyang, Chongping, Xianhong, Pingchuan, and the Prince Ding Mansion. The capital of the West Hill would be moved to An City, which was located in the center of the West Hill, within 2 months. Once this edict was announced, not only was the imperial court shocked. Even the rulers of the distant countries were shocked. Even though they didn't take over the entire West Hill, the Mahist army took over 1/3 of the West Hill, including the imperial city, in less than 3 months. This kind of combat strength made people wary and fearful. Moreover, this was not the full strength of the Mahist army. After the announcement of the Emperor of Xiling's edict, the Mahist army was in a state of jubilation, unlike the shock, fear, and anger elsewhere. On the 9th day after the Mahist army besieged the imperial city, the gates of the West Hill imperial city were finally opened. The Mahist army took down the most fortified city in the West Hill with almost no casualties. It could be said that they did it without shedding a drop of blood. Because West Hill did not completely surrender to the Mahist army, the Emperor of Xiling did not come out of the city to welcome the Mahist army. He only sent the ministers of the imperial court to follow Su Qingbai to the city gate to welcome him. Even so, the faces of many of the West Hills officials were still very ugly. Mo Xiaoyao and Yili each rode a horse, side by side. Behind them were Feng Zhiyao, Qin Feng, Xue Jing, and the others dressed in red. Behind them were the Black Cloud Cavalry, also dressed in black and riding black horses. They were already part of the infantry. In order not to frighten the people in the city, the Mahist army did not all enter the city. They only brought 10,000 people into the city. The hundreds of thousands of soldiers under them were left outside the city for Zhang Qilan to command. Even though there were rumors of a massacre in Bian City, the aftermath was handled well. Moreover, the Mahist army did not harm the people along the way. The ordinary people in the Emperor of Xiling City were not afraid of the Mahist army. They crowded on both sides of the street to watch the show. When they saw that the pair at the front was Prince Ding and Princess Ding, countless envious gazes fell on them. When they entered the main hall of the Emperor of Shiling's palace, the Emperor of Xiling came out to welcome them. When he saw the two people standing side by side, he could not help but be stunned. After all, even if Mo Xiaoyao and Yili were not the most famous people in the world, they could definitely be called household names. Moreover, Mo Xiaoyao became famous too early. There were many people who were not familiar with him in the middle. It was easy for people who were not familiar with him to classify him as one of the people of the previous generation. At this time, when he looked at the man and woman in front of him, although the man had a head of white hair, his face was handsome and his aura was awe-inspiring. The woman's face was beautiful and elegant. She was graceful and graceful, giving people a sense of magnanimity and confidence. Just looking at their age, they were only in their 20s. Such people, no matter which one it was, were without a doubt the most outstanding people in the world. Ha, Prince Ding, Princess Ding, Zhen has been looking forward to meeting you for a long time. Seeing you today, Zhen really is impressive. Fortunately, the Emperor of Xiling quickly reacted and withdrew his gaze from Yi Li's body. Although he had some shortcomings, it was not to the point where he was blinded by lust. He was still very clear on what kind of woman he could look at and what kind of woman he could not look at. Mo Xiaoyao glanced at him indifferently and withdrew his gradually cold gaze. Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "Your Majesty is too polite. If we have offended Your Majesty, please forgive us." "Not at all. Your Highness is too serious." "Prince Ding, Your Highness, please come in. Zhen has already ordered people to prepare some wine. Please do not dislike it." Seeing that Yi Li had spoken before Mo Xiaoyao, and that Prince Ding did not show any displeasure on his face, the Emperor of Xiling was even more certain of Princess Ding's position in Prince Ding's heart. What he did not know was that Yi Li had helped him out by speaking first. Otherwise, he was afraid that his passionate love would be snubbed and he would not be able to back down in front of so many officials. "Your Majesty, please." When the group entered the main hall, they discovered that the Xiling Imperial Palace was exceptionally simple. Not to mention the dazzling splendor of the Dechu state, there were not even many precious decorations. The entire hall appeared empty, making people feel cool and bleak for no reason. Feng Zhiyao looked in puzzlement at Su Qingbai sitting below him. He remembered the news that the Prince Ding mansion had received. This Emperor of Xiling was not extremely extravagant, but he was not a thrifty person either. Su Qingbai looked with a shadow of a smile at the Emperor of Xiling who was chatting with Mo Xiaoyao with a smile. Feng Zhiyao blinked. Looking at the smiling Emperor of Xiling in the hall, he suddenly understood. It seemed that the capital was going to be moved. The Emperor of Xiling was worried that the Prince Ding mansion would take a fancy to the treasures in his palace and had hidden them beforehand. In the hall, the Emperor of Xiling looked at Mo Xiaoyao and said, "Prince Ding, I had someone deliver the letter yesterday. Does Prince Ding have any objections?" Mo Xiaoyao leaned back in his chair and raised his hand to take a letter from Zhuo Jing behind him. He said lightly, "The Emperor of Shiling's conditions can be agreed to by the Prince Ding mansion. Except for one thing, please forgive me for not being able to help with the matter of Nanzhao." The Emperor of Shiling's smile immediately froze. He forced a smile and said, "How can that be? Prince Ding is resourceful. As long as he sincerely helps how can I not be able to help?" Now, the Prince Ding mansion was not the only enemy in Xiling. The Nanzhao kingdom in the south and various small countries in the west were all eyeing them covetously. Nanzhao had even sent troops to occupy a state bordering Xiling and Nanzhao. Mo Xiaoyao said in a low voice, "The northwest and Nanzhao are too far apart. If we ask the Maoist army to help Xiling block Nanzhao, first of all, it is not justifiable. Second, the journey is long. When the Maoist army arrives, they will be exhausted. I'm afraid that they will fall into Nanzhao's trap." The Emperor of Xiling smiled and said, "That's not what I meant." Even if Mo Xiaoyao really wanted to send troops for him, he did not dare to accept it. Now he only hoped that Mo Xiaoyao and the Maoist army would obediently stay in the territory they had already obtained and not harm the rest of his land. Asking the Maoist army to help drive away Nanzhao's troops was undoubtedly driving away the wolf and winning the tiger. Mo Xiaoyao raised his eyebrows questioningly. The Emperor of Xiling smiled and said, "Prince Ding's name shakes the world. I believe that as long as Prince Ding expresses himself, Nanzhao will naturally restrain itself." In reality, the Emperor of Xiling did not really care about Nanzhao. But now he not only had to deal with the countries in the west, he also had to prepare to deal with Enchanting. He had no time to tangle with Nanzhao. This time, he did not want to be a puppet again. Moreover, he had given up the imperial city. The Emperor of Xiling knew that if he gave Enchanting a chance to come back, his days would not be easy. Chapter 688. Mo Xiaoyao understood and nodded with a smile, "That's not a problem. I'll send a letter to the Queen of Nanzhao later." As for the former Princess Anxi, the current Queen of Nanzhao didn't care if she listened or not after reading the letter. Receiving a satisfactory answer, the smile on the Emperor of Shiling's face became even wider. Looking at Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li, his gaze became even more sincere. If the Prince Ding mansion could help him pacify Nanzhao and deal with Enchanting, then the imperial city wouldn't be a loss. Prince Ding, to be honest. Even though we've already decided to move the capital to An City. But, as far as I know, Ai's nephew, Enchanting, is still within Shiling's borders, and he has many soldiers under his command who support Genom of Gojoseon. This medicine. What should we do? The Emperor of Xiling asked. Mo Xiaoyao smiled faintly, "Emperor of Xiling, our ancestors have a saying, if the name isn't right, the words won't be right. Enchanting is just a Genom of Gojoseon. He doesn't even have a proper title of regent. And Enchanting is just a Genom of Gojoseon. Could it be that the Emperor of Xiling can't even deal with him?" The Emperor of Xiling smiled bitterly. "Enchanting isn't scary, but the soldiers under his command and the people who are loyal to Jinan Palace can't be underestimated." Mo Xiaoyao supported his forehead with one hand and smiled faintly, "As far as I know. Great General Shuntian is in the imperial city right now. Presumably, he'll follow the Emperor of Xiling to An City." The Emperor of Shiling's expression changed slightly. Feng Ao was indeed in the imperial city, but this news wasn't even told to the people closest to him. Looking at Mo Xiaoyao's casual manner, it was obvious that he didn't just find out. The Emperor of Shiling's heart couldn't help but tremble. His fear of Mo Xiaoyao increased by another level. Mo Xiaoyao didn't seem to see the Emperor of Shiling's expression and continued, "Besides, this war started because of Genom of Gojoseon. Could it be that his son wants to make a move against the king who helped them clean up? If so, then the loyalty of Jinan Palace. Many things didn't need to be said too clearly. The Emperor of Xiling suppressed the shock in his heart and smiled. I understand. Thank you Prince Ding for guidance. The Emperor of Xiling's words are too serious. The main hall was filled with joy and harmony. Just as the host and guests were enjoying themselves, a piercing voice suddenly rushed in from outside. Father! Father! The Emperor of Xiling didn't have time to react before the figure of a gorgeous and graceful woman rushed in. She didn't even look at the people who were still sitting in the hall and shouted at the Emperor of Xiling, Father! Are you really going to give up the imperial city to the Prince Ding mansion? Are you crazy? How can you face the ancestors of Xiling by doing this? The Emperor of Xiling's expression changed and he said sternly, impudent. Ling Yun, you're getting bolder and bolder. Don't you know what kind of place this is? How dare you barge in? Although what he had done had indeed made him unable to raise his head in front of his ancestors and subjects, it was not his daughter's turn to criticize him. Yili looked curiously at the gorgeous woman who rushed in. Who else could it be but the Princess Lingyun who wanted to steal Mo Xiuyao from her? It was 8 or 9 years ago. The arrogant princess who was in her 20s was now almost 30 years old. If Yili didn't look carefully, she wouldn't have recognized the woman in front of her. Princess Lingyun, who was in her late 20s, was still well maintained. Her snow-white skin was picturesque and she was beautiful. It was just that the arrogance of a young girl had become a little arrogant and mean after many years. The gorgeous clothes, delicate eyebrows, and the sharp light in her eyes all showed the personality of the princess. A proud young girl might be moving in a different way, but an arrogant young woman was not so likable in the eyes of men. Am I wrong? Princess Lingyun raised her chin proudly and glared at her father, unwilling to admit defeat. You. The Emperor of Xiling was speechless and fell back on the dragon throne. He was clearly very angry. Feng Zhiyao rubbed his chin and looked at the shrewish woman in front of him. Even though he hadn't seen this Princess Lingyun before, Feng Zhiyao had heard of the story of the princess who dared to challenge the Prince Ding mansion and was so scared she couldn't get up. He looked at Princess Lingyun with a smile and said, Is this the princess who competed with the princess consort back then? It seems that her personality is better than before. Wang Fei, maybe you can compete again now. When he said this, Princess Lingyun clearly realized that there were other people in the hall. She first glared angrily at Feng Zhiyao and then saw the man and woman in white sitting together not far away. She couldn't help but pause. The man that the young and proud princess had admired for a long time and wanted to marry regardless of his disability had completely recovered after so many years. He was even more elegant than before. However, that head of snow-white hair was so dazzling in her eyes. Even though she was far away in West Hill, Princess Lingyun knew everything about Prince Ding. She also knew why his black hair turned white. She couldn't help but look at Yili at the side. Yili met Princess Lingyun's gaze and nodded with a faint smile. Yet Yili's elegant and graceful appearance deeply provoked Princess Lingyun. She looked at her gorgeous and heavy clothes, her body covered in pearls and jade, and the heavy makeup on her face. All of this reminded her that she was no longer the proud and beautiful princess of the past. Anger rushed to her heart. Princess Lingyun pointed at Yili and said, Yili, I want to challenge you. Chapter 689. With these words, the hall instantly fell silent. A moment later, Feng Zhiyao's laughter rang out in the hall. First, it was a low chuckle. Then, as though he could not hold it in any longer, he began to laugh loudly. Princess Lingyun was so embarrassed that she became angry. She glared angrily at Feng Zhiyao and said, What are you laughing at? Feng Zhiyao wiped the tears from the corners of his eyes. He smiled and waved his hand, saying, "Nothing, I suddenly felt like laughing, so I laughed." Then he turned to Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li. His lips moved as he soundlessly said a few words. Yi Li, who was proficient in lip reading, could clearly see that Feng Zhiyao had said, fatale. Even though Mo Xiaoyao did not know what Feng Zhiyao had said, he could guess from his expression. He glanced dangerously at him and did not respond. Originally, Princess Lingyun had been impulsive. But since she had already said it, she let it go. She raised her chin to look at Yi Li and asked, "How about it? Do you dare?" Yi Li was slightly helpless. She smiled at Princess Lingyun and asked, "Princess, why should I accept your challenge?" The reason she had accepted the challenge in the past was for Mo Xiaoyao, for the Prince Ding mansion and her dignity as Princess Ding. But now, Yi Li could not think of why she would accept Princess Lingyun's challenge. Looking at Princess Lingyun, she knew that she was already married. She could not possibly still be thinking about Mo Xiaoyao, right? As for the dignity of the Prince Ding mansion, there was no need for her, the princess consort, to defeat the princess of a defeated country to prove herself. "You don't dare." Princess Lingyun looked disdainfully at Yi Li. Yi Li smiled and said, "I don't need it." She didn't need to accept Princess Lingyun's challenge. In this world, no one would dare to say that she wasn't good enough for Mo Xiaoyao, or that she wasn't good enough to be Princess Ding. Upon hearing this, Princess Lingyun's expression turned even uglier. Yi Li was right. She did not need to accept her challenge. To put it bluntly, with Princess Lingyun's current reputation and status, she had no right to challenge Princess Ding. The Emperor of Xiling saw that the atmosphere was a little awkward and hurriedly said, "Lingyun has been spoiled by Zhen since she was young. She doesn't know the severity of the situation. Princess, please forgive her." Princess Lingyun opened her mouth, wanting to say something. The Emperor of Xiling fiercely glared at her and sternly said, "Why don't you take a look at where this is? Why aren't you leaving?" Mo Xiaoyao held Yi Li's hand as he stood up. He smiled at the Emperor of Xiling and said, "Emperor of Xiling, since we've already reached an agreement, I will return to the Emperor of Xiling. I and the princess consort will return to the guest house to rest. Princess Li is a bit tired these past few days." The Emperor of Xiling quickly smiled and said, "Why don't Prince Ding and the princess consort stay in the palace for the time being? Zhen has already ordered people to clean out the palace for Prince Ding's group." Mo Xiaoyao waved his hand and said with a smile, "There's no need. I am not picky about where I live. I'll leave first. Zhen has already prepared a welcoming banquet for Prince Ding and the princess consort." Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "Many thanks to the Emperor of Xiling for the trouble. But I'm a bit tired. Today, I can only thank the Emperor of Xiling for his kindness." Since Prince Ding and the princess consort had said so, the Emperor of Xiling couldn't force them to stay. He could only have people send them out. Mo Xiaoyao held Yi Li's hand as they walked in front of Princess Lingyun. They paused for a moment before continuing to walk out. Seeing Mo Xiaoyao's group leave the main hall, the Emperor of Xiling finally let out a sigh of relief. He turned his gaze to Princess Lingyun and said with a frown, "Lingyun, you?" Princess Lingyun's face paled and she suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. The Emperor of Xiling jumped in fright and hurriedly ordered people to support Princess Lingyun. He asked, "What's going on?" Even though this daughter had put him on the spot, she was still his own daughter. Seeing her suddenly spit out blood, the Emperor of Xiling was still slightly worried. The Tai came quickly and took Princess Lingyun's pulse. He said with confusion, "How did the princess suddenly get an internal injury?" The other people naturally didn't understand. After all, even though Princess Lingyun had said she wanted to challenge Princess Ding, they hadn't fought. The other people in the hall hadn't even touched Princess Lingyun. How did she suddenly get an internal injury? Prince Ding. Princess Lingyun raised a hand to wipe away the blood at the corner of her mouth and said in a low voice through gritted teeth. These days, the entire city of the Emperor of Xiling was in turmoil. The post house in the city occupied by the people of the Prince Ding mansion was much quieter because there were Mahist army soldiers guarding outside. However, there were still all kinds of people who came to see them for all kinds of reasons. Even though the Emperor of Xiling was still in charge of the Emperor of Xiling's family and the imperial court, everyone knew that the city of the Emperor of Xiling already belonged to the Prince Ding mansion. The people who were quick-witted and didn't plan to follow the Emperor of Xiling south to An City couldn't help but have ideas about the Prince Ding mansion. They wanted to find a better future for themselves. In the post house, the city of the Emperor of Xiling in September already had some of the coldness of early winter. Fortunately, there weren't many plants in Xiling's mansion, so it didn't seem desolate. On the side of the fake mountain in the yard, Mo Xiaoyao and Su Qingbai were sitting facing each other and playing chess. Yili sat next to Mo Xiaoyao and watched the game. Even Feng Xiao and Su Qingfeng, who were always active, were sitting on the side and watching. Mo Xiaoyao and Su Qingbai's chess style were not bold people. They played carelessly and had a sense of leisure. Feng Xiao was bored watching on the side and turned to look at Yili sitting next to Mo Xiaoyao. He smiled and said, "Wang Fei, have you heard of the strange things that have happened in the city of the Emperor of Xiling in the past 2 days?" Yili looked up at him and was slightly puzzled. Feng Xiao said with a smile, "I heard that yesterday was the Autumn Moon Festival in the city of the Emperor of Xiling. It was probably a festival where the daughters of the officials in the city gathered. Did they not send you invitations?" Feng Xiao was slightly surprised. Logically, the officials and nobles in the city of the Emperor of Xiling should not be so blind. Especially those who had no intention of going south with the Emperor of Xiling. Yili thought and said, "I did receive a few invitations, but I rejected them." "Did something happen?" "It's good that you rejected them. I heard that Princess Lingyun went to the Autumn Moon Festival yesterday and was blocked outside the door and not allowed to enter." Feng Xiao's smile was absolutely filled with schadenfreude. Who asked that woman, Princess Lingyun, to look so mean? It was one thing, but she also looked like her nose was on top of her head. Wasn't this hateful? Young Master Feng San had never been a kind person. Blocked outside the door. Why is that? Yili raised her eyebrows, her interest piqued. No matter how arrogant Princess Lingyun was, she was still the princess of West Hill. She had the right to be arrogant. Most influential people wouldn't go against her, not to mention deliberately slapping her in the face. Feng Xiao said with a smile, "I don't know what happened, but the news of Princess Lingyun provoking Princess Ding in the palace has spread all over the city. Speaking of which, the nobles in West Hill also know about Princess Lingyun's incident in the Dechu state. Now it is being talked about again. Coincidentally, the people in charge of the Autumn Moon Festival this year are the wealthy merchants of West Hill City, the Sun family. Since the Murong family was destroyed, the Sun family rose rapidly. It is not an exaggeration to say that they are now the richest family in the imperial city. They were once officials of West Hill who gave up their official position and went into business. They have always been at odds with Princess Lingyun. Now that the imperial city has changed hands, why would they care about Princess Lingyun? Chapter 690. The Sun Family. Su Qingbai, who was playing chess, raised his head and asked. Feng Xiao raised his eyebrows and smiled, "Why?" "Fourth young master, do you remember them?" Su Qingbai nodded and said, "Not long after I arrived at West Hill, the head of the Sun family sent someone to deliver gifts. The Sun family should have sent many gifts to the post house in the past 2 days, right?" Mo Xiaoyao lowered his head and continued to think about his chess moves. Yili and Feng Xiao looked at Zhuo Jing, who was standing at the side. These matters were handled by Zhuojing and Lin Han. Zhuojing thought and said, the head of the Sun family sent many gifts these days. In addition, young Master Zhang of the Sun family personally came to see us once. However, the prince and princess consort said that they did not want to see anyone, so I returned. Yili was puzzled and asked, fourth brother, is there a problem with the Sun family? Su Qingbai shook his head and said, no, I just feel that the head of the Sun family has a unique vision. When I first came to West Hill, they were the only ones in the entire imperial city who came forward to make friends. Feng Zhiyao did not mind and said lightly, maybe he wants to please both sides. Businessmen don't like to put all their chips in one basket. Su Qingbai shook his head and said, with the Sun family's current wealth and status, they can't afford to act casually. If you didn't come quickly, the Sun family would be in trouble in a few days. Now, do you think the Emperor of Xiling is willing to leave so much of the Sun family's wealth to the Prince Ding mansion? Yili pondered for a moment and said, so, the head of the Sun family will come to see us again very soon. Yesterday's matter was just the Sun family's attitude towards the Prince Ding mansion. Su Qingbai put down a chess piece and said with a smile, you can say that. This matter, what does the prince think? Feng Zhiyao looked at Imo Xiuyao with a smile. In the past few days, they had received many gifts. Needless to say, gold, silver, jewelry, rare antiques and rare treasures were not rare either. However, there were still quite a few stunning beauties that made people not know whether to laugh or cry. Among these beauties, there were some famous courtesans and dancers, but there were also some younger sisters and daughters of the rich merchants in West Hill. Even though everyone in the world knew that Ding Wang had deep feelings for Ding Wang Fei, but it was inevitable that there would be some people who wanted to give it a try with a fluke mentality. As a result, for the first time in his life, Prince Ding was chased out of the princess consort's bedroom to sleep in the study. Feng Zhiyao, who was watching from the side, could not help but express that Prince had been wronged. Mo Xiuyao glanced at Feng Zhiyao indifferently. He casually threw down the chess piece in his hand and said indifferently, didn't we say that these trivial matters can be left to Qingbai to handle? After saying this, he glanced at Yi Li who was sitting beside him. Su Qingbai was Li's cousin. Of course, he knew how to handle things so that Li would not be unhappy. In reality, towards those who came to offer gifts, especially those who did not have eyes, Mo Xiuyao's idea was to just kill them. However, it was clear that not only would his subordinates oppose this idea, even Li would not agree. Seeing that Mo Xiuyao had no intention of playing chess, Su Qingbai put down the chess piece with a smile. He looked with a shadow of a smile at Yi Li and Mo Xiuyao. Of course, he knew that Prince Ding had been chased out of the house to sleep in the study for 2 days. He was also slightly surprised. It had to be known that in these years, this couple had always been so loving that their faces had never turned red. Mo Xiuyao's status was there. It was impossible that he had not been tempted by beauty. However, he had never seen Li become jealous. This time, could it be that Mo Xiuyao really had some thoughts? Su Qingbai's handsome eyes flashed slightly. He smiled and asked, Prince, you're exaggerating. How could I dare to make decisions on such an important matter? Young Master Feng San, seeing that you're so happy, could it be that you really sent some stunning beauties this time? The corner of Feng Zhiyao's mouth twitched. What did he mean by seeing that he was so happy? He said it as if he was some perverted demon. However, seeing Mo Xiuyao make a fool of himself immediately suppressed the faint displeasure in his heart. He smiled and said, Young Master Feng San, you don't have to say it. There really is. 2 days ago, Marquis Chang Ningho sent a pair of stunning beauties. Although she couldn't be said to be devastatingly beautiful, she was definitely a rare beauty. More importantly, they are twins. They look exactly the same. Jing, Lin Han, and I looked at them for a long time but could not tell who was who. On the side, Jing rubbed his nose and thought to himself, young Master Feng San, you were the one who looked at them for a long time, and you were also the one who could not tell who was who. Can you not drag us, innocent outsiders, into this? We have been specially trained and taught by the Wang Fei. How can we not tell who is who? Mo Xiaoyao listened to Feng Zhiyao excitedly introduce the beauties that had been sent to Su Qingbai and Su Qingfeng. Then he looked at Yili beside him, who had the same smile as Su Qingbai. He couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. In reality, he also didn't understand why Li was suddenly angry. However, he knew that it was not purely because of those women who were not even worth mentioning. All these years, Li had never been angry with him. Even if she was occasionally angry, it was more like a joke. She leaned into Mo Xiaoyao's embrace and said softly, I'm not angry because of this matter. Actually. Yili sighed somewhat sullenly and said, I also don't know why. I just feel a little frustrated in my heart. Yili also felt very troubled by her uncontrollable emotions. In both her previous and current lives, there were very few times when she could not control her emotions like this. Mo Xiaoyao raised his hand and touched Yili's forehead. He asked with concern, Are you feeling unwell? Let the doctor come and take a look. Yili shook her head. I'm fine. I'm fine. Maybe I'll be fine in a few days. Are you really fine? Mo Xiaoyao asked worriedly. However, Yili's expression was normal. It did not seem like she was feeling unwell. I'm really fine. Then, can your husband go back to sleep tonight? Mo Xiaoyao asked. Yili looked at him for a while. Then she stood up and shook her head. I'm still in a bad mood. So. Prince, please sleep in the study for another 2 days. Seeing Yili turn and walk away, Mo Xiaoyao's indifferent eyes had a trace of warmth and helplessness. Prince. There was only Mo Xiaoyao left in the quiet garden. The warmth in his eyes gradually faded and was replaced by coldness and anger. Qin Feng silently appeared behind Mo Xiaoyao. Mo Xiaoyao asked with a lowered brow, Has Wang Fei been feeling unwell these past 2 days? Or has something happened that made her unhappy? Qin Feng lowered his head to think. Then he shook his head and said, No. Wang Fei's food, clothing, housing, and transportation are all normal. She hasn't encountered anything bad. Even though it was rare for Wang Fei to chase the prince out to sleep in the study, Qin Feng did not think it was anything major. Which husband and wife would not have a temper? Even though he had never married, he had heard some married elders in the military talk about it. Men, it was normal for them to occasionally sleep in the study or kneel on the abacus. Go. Protect Wang Fei. She hasn't been feeling well these past 2 days. Mo Xiaoyao ordered. Yes, I will do as you command. Reporting to Prince, the Bai family just sent someone to deliver some things. Lin Han came in to report. Mo Xiaoyao raised his brow. If it was just something ordinary, there was no need for him to come in to report. Lin Han said, The Bai family sent many gifts, including 4 beauties and 4 servants. Lin Han's face twisted when he mentioned the servants. The Bai family was indeed a prestigious family in West Hill. They were more considerate than others. They probably heard that Prince Ding was not interested in beauties, so they took another approach and sent him a handsome young man in the name of a servant. The Bai family. Mo Xiaoyao's voice was cold. Lin Han nodded and said, Yes, the Bai family's housekeeper sent them personally. They even left an invitation for Prince and Wang Fei to come to the Bai family for a banquet. Kill them. Chapter 692. After all, killing a few people was not as easy as killing a few chickens. At least, he soon found out that the people he sent over did not achieve the effect he wanted. Therefore, the next morning, the head of the Bai family came to visit in person. The Bai family was known as the most powerful family in the Emperor of Shilin. Their status in West Hill was similar to that of the original Su family in Dechu State. However, the Su family did not like to monopolize political affairs and prioritize learning. The Bai family was the opposite. Since the founding of West Hill, the Bai family had been high-ranking officials in the imperial court. Even among the concubines of West Hill, there were many women from the Bai family. The Bai family had produced several empresses and dozens of imperial concubines. It could be said that they were the family of the empress. However, ever since Regent Enchanting came to power, even though the empress was still a woman of the Bai family, and even imperial concubine Su Zuidi, who was doted on by everyone, entered the palace using the Bai family surname. Although the Bai family and Genom of Gojoseon had many secret connections, there was only one thing. The empress had no children, and Genom of Gojoseon's late concubine and the current Genom of Gojoseon's wife were not surnamed Bai. This caused the Bai family's power to decline imperceptibly. Enchanting's scheming was not comparable to the cowardly Emperor of Shilin. Therefore, he used the Bai family and did not deprive them of their power because they were the family of the empress. However, he would never let the Bai family be as glorious as before. Therefore, in recent years, not to mention the palace and Jinan Palace, there were very few women of the Bai family who married into the imperial family. After a long time, the Bai family could see that Genom of Gojoseon was suppressing them. A family like the Bai family naturally did not value loyalty and patriotism. To them, the continuation of the family, wealth and power were the most important. Therefore, when the Mahist army arrived at the city, they were already planning their future. And the Su family of Dechu State was undoubtedly a model for them to follow. The Su family had only married off a granddaughter to Prince Ding. Now, the Su family's power in Prince Ding's fu could be said to be second to none. The Bai family had never thought of replacing Princess Ding, but as long as Prince Ding took a fancy to a girl from the Bai family's status in the Emperor of Shilin City would be greatly different from the other Shilin families. Therefore, among the 8 men and women who were sent over by the servants, there were 2 young mistresses and 1 young master of the Bai family who were born of a concubine. However, there was no more news of these people after they entered the post house. Because the Mahist army was out to fight, they didn't bring any maids or servants with them. Other than Mo Xiaoyao, Yi Li and other personal attendants in the courier hostel, most of the people doing the rough work were from West Hill. These Shilin families couldn't do anything else, but they could gather some information. The courier hostel wasn't large, but there was no news of those people at all. Obviously, they were doomed. How could the master of the Bai family not be anxious? Master Bai, the prince invites you. After being left to drink tea in the outer hall for an hour, the master of the Bai family was somewhat anxious and unhappy, but he didn't show it on his face. When he saw Lin Han who came to pass on the message, he didn't have the arrogance of a master of an aristocratic family. He nodded politely and said with a smile, "Thank you, young master. Please lead the way." The place where Mo Xiaoyao received the master of the Bai family was still in the small courtyard of the courier hostel. The courier hostel wasn't very big. The inner courtyard was where Yi Li and Mo Xiaoyao lived. These days, Yi Li was in a bad mood, so Mo Xiaoyao naturally didn't allow outsiders to disturb her. Most of the official business was handled in the study in the outer courtyard. When the master of the Bai family was led to the garden by Lin Han, Mo Xiaoyao was sitting under a tree, holding something in his hand and slowly sculpting it. The master of the Bai family glanced at it and saw that it was a hairpin that had already been carved into a line. Although he couldn't tell what it was at first, but seeing how carefully Mo Xiaoyao was sculpting it, he knew that it must be very important. And looking at the quality of the jade, the master of the Bai family couldn't help but feel his heart skip a beat. It was a piece of white warm jade of the highest quality. Warm jade of this quality was rare even in the entire Shilling Kingdom. And there was only one piece in the Emperor of Shilling City. The master of the Bai family had coveted it, but in the end, it was bought by the Sun family. More importantly, the jade that he had been thinking of asking a jade carving master to carve a rare treasure was now an inconspicuous hairpin in Prince Ding's hand. The master of the Bai family couldn't help but feel bitter and hateful. Mo Xiuyao didn't pay attention to the person standing in front of him. He held the carving knife in one hand and the jade hairpin in the other, frowning with dissatisfaction. It had been too long since he had worked, so he was a little rusty. I am Bai Yunqing from the Bai family of Shilling. Greetings to your highness Prince Ding. The master of the Bai family knew that if he didn't say anything, Prince Ding wouldn't pay attention to him even if he stood there for 2 to 4 hours. Although he felt a little uncomfortable, thinking about the analysis of the Prince Ding mansion by his aides, the master of the Bai family felt that he could tolerate it. Mo Xiuyao carefully put the jade hairpin and carving knife in his hand back into a sandalwood box beside him. Then he looked up at Bai Yunqing and nodded. So it's the master of the Bai family. Nice to meet you. Please sit. The corner of Bai Yunqing's mouth twitched. He looked around and said, "Thank you for your kindness, Prince Ding. I'll just stand." There was no chair in sight, not even a stone bench. Mo Xiuyao just sat on a stone by the side of the rockery. Naturally, he didn't plan to specially prepare a chair for him. Mo Xiuyao raised an eyebrow and didn't care. As long as Master Bai is happy. Bai Yunqing couldn't help but vomit blood in his heart. Was he happy? He was an old master of a family, how could he casually sit on the ground? Why has the Bai family come? Mo Xiuyao asked carelessly. Bai Yunqing said respectfully, "Your Highness Prince Ding and Your Highness have just come to the Imperial City. I can barely be considered a host. I just want to be a good host. Prince Ding and Your Highness, please do me the honor." Mo Xiuyao shook his head and said helplessly, "It's not that I don't want to give face to Master Bai, but Your Highness hasn't been feeling well these days. I'm afraid I have to thank Master Bai for his kindness." Bai Yunqing was overjoyed. The reason he brought Princess Ding was out of courtesy. The Bai family wanted to send someone to the Prince Ding mansion, but they didn't want to offend Princess Ding. Naturally, it was best that Princess Ding wasn't here. Then I wonder if Prince Bai Yunqing probed. Mo Xiuyao shook his head and said, "Your Highness isn't feeling well. I feel uneasy and don't want to go out." As such, Bai Yunqing could only smile apologetically. Prince Ding had already rejected him so cleanly. He couldn't say anything else. Otherwise, it would have the opposite effect. Thinking about it, Bai Yunqing could only try to change the topic that Prince Ding would be interested in. In a month, the Emperor will be moving the capital to An City. I wonder if Your Highness Prince Ding has plans to move the capital, move to the Imperial City temporarily. Although Bai Yunqing hadn't been to the northwest, he still had some understanding of Glass City. For people who lived in the Imperial City for a long time, Glass City was really unpresentable. It wasn't that Glass City wasn't prosperous. In fact, after the Prince Ding mansion's management these years, Glass City's prosperity didn't lose to the Chu capital or the Emperor of Shilling City. In just a few short years, it had such an effect. It could be seen that Prince Ding was very capable. But the most important place in Glass City, the Prince Ding mansion, couldn't compare to the Chu capital or Shiling's imperial palace. After so many years, it was only a mansion that was slightly larger than other mansions. Therefore, in Bai Yunqing's opinion, Mo Xiuyao moving the Prince Ding mansion's political center to the Emperor of Shilling City was a foregone conclusion. Chapter 693. Mo Xiaoyao shook his head and said calmly, "The Emperor of Xiling City is not suitable to be the capital." The Emperor of Xiling City was grand and majestic, but it was too far away from the Central Plains. Any ruler with ambitions to conquer the Central Plains would not choose this place as their capital. After all, the heroes who grew up with the culture of the Central Plains wanted to unite the Central Plains and not dominate the western regions. Back then, the founding ancestor of Xiling had chosen this place mostly because the Chu at the time was too powerful. Bai Yunqing was not a mediocre person. He understood what Mo Xiaoyao said after thinking about it for a while. His heart couldn't help but tremble as he looked at Mo Xiaoyao with even more respect. There were many people who were secretly debating whether Mo Xiaoyao's sudden attack on Xiling was coincidental or premeditated. But looking at the white-robed, white-haired young ruler in front of him, Bai Yunqing suddenly believed that Mo Xiaoyao had premeditated this. Thinking of this, Bai Yunqing's eyes shone brighter and his determination became more resolute. "The prince is ambitious and I admire you. The Bai family is willing to serve you faithfully. I hope the prince will not abandon us," Bai Yunqing said respectfully. Mo Xiaoyao looked up and calmly looked at the middle-aged man in front of him. Bai Yunqing seemed to feel a strange pressure coming from all directions. If he hadn't been careful, he would have knelt down on the spot. Even when facing Jinan Wang, he didn't feel this kind of pressure that seemed to have materialized. Bai Yunqing maintained a respectful appearance, but a thin layer of sweat appeared on his forehead. After a long time, Mo Xiaoyao said indifferently, "Patriarch Bai, you don't have to be so courteous. This king will return to Glass City soon. In the future, I will need Patriarch Bai's help in many matters here." Bai Yunqing was overjoyed and hurriedly replied, "Many thanks, Your Highness. The Bai family will not dare to disappoint Your Highness." Mo Xiaoyao nodded and was about to say something when Zhuo Jing came in and reported, "Prince, the master of the Sun family wishes to see you." Hearing this, Bai Yunqing's heart sank. Originally, the Bai family and the Sun family did not have much to do with each other. One was in politics and the other was in business. There was no deep hatred between the two families. But when Genom of Gojoseon was in power, although the Sun family was not loyal to the royal family, they did not like Genom of Gojoseon. Genom of Gojoseon had plundered a lot of gold and silver from the Sun family many times through the hands of the Bai family. By the time the Bai family understood that Genom of Gojoseon wanted to sow discord between the two families, the hatred had already been formed. In the past few years, the Sun family and the Bai family had been fighting openly and secretly. Genom of Gojoseon did not help either side and allowed them to fight. When one side was weaker, he would even lend a helping hand. As a result, the hatred between the two families became deeper and deeper. Now, no one was in the mood to resolve it. Bai Yunqing had just joined the Prince Ding mansion. Naturally, he did not want the Sun family to be more powerful than him. Unfortunately, he could not make the decision now. Mo Xiaoyao would not refuse to see the Sun family even if it was because of the top-quality warm jade. As expected, after hearing Zhuo Jing's words, Mo Xiaoyao raised his eyebrows and said, "Let him in." Not long after, the head of the Sun family had already strode in. Unlike Bai Yunqing, who was over 50 years old, the master of the Sun family was completely different from the master of the Bai family. More importantly, she was a woman. The master of the Sun family was not yet 30 years old. Her appearance was not very outstanding, but she was still dignified. There was a valiant and neat aura between her eyebrows that ordinary women did not have. At first glance, one could tell that she was a woman of character. No wonder she dared to make things difficult for Princess Lin Yun. She was the wife of the previous master of the Sun family. The previous master of the Sun family had been ill since he was young. After Madam's son married into the Sun family, she took care of most of the Sun family's affairs. 3 years ago, the master of the Sun family died of illness. Madame Sun, who only had one daughter, used her identity as a woman to suppress the side branches who coveted the Sun family's wealth. She became the master of the Sun family as a widow and waited for her only daughter to grow up and find a son-in-law to inherit the Sun family's bloodline. Although Xi Ling's restrictions on women were not as strict as the Dechu state, Madame Sun was able to stand firm as a widow in this imperial city surrounded by strong enemies. Her methods and knowledge were ordinary. I am Sun Yusher Huinyang. Greetings to Prince Ding. Madame Sun was not like ordinary women who called themselves servants or concubines. Instead, she called herself, I am like a man. Her bearing was free and easy, natural and unrestrained. It made people have a good impression at first sight. Mo Xiuyao smiled faintly and said, I have long heard that the master of the Sun family is a woman who is not inferior to men. Today, I see that you live up to your reputation. Madame Sun, please sit. Madame Sun smiled and thanked him. She did not mind sitting down on a rock not far from Mo Xiuyao's side. Mo Xiuyao turned his head and said to Lin Han behind him, Go and see if Wang Fei is free. Didn't she say that she wanted to see Madame Sun the day before yesterday? Madame Sun quickly said, I don't dare. I should go and pay my respects to Wang Fei. Mo Xiuyao waved his hand faintly and said, Lily does not care about this. Moreover, the courier station was not as big as the original I's residence. The temporary residence in the inner courtyard, whether it was Yi Li or Mo Xiuyao, was not willing for outsiders to set foot in. Lin Han accepted the order and left. Mo Xiuyao smiled faintly and said, Master Bai and Madame Sun must be old acquaintances. With his insight, even if he did not know beforehand, it was impossible for him not to see that these two families did not get along. But neither Madame Sun nor Bai Yunqing dared to show it in front of him. Both of them were superiors and naturally understood Prince Ding's thoughts. As superiors, it was impossible for them to use a large amount of time to reconcile the conflicts of their subordinates. It was also impossible for them to give up on one family just because they did not get along. As long as it did not interfere with the matters of the Prince Ding mansion, Prince Ding had no intention of interfering in the conflict between the two families. But they could not let the conflict between the two families annoy Prince Ding. Madame Sun smiled faintly and said, Prince Ding is right. The Sun and Bai families have lived in the imperial city for a long time and are naturally old acquaintances. To be able to see Master Bai here today, this one is not honored. Bai Yunqing pulled the corners of his mouth and said with a smile, Madame Sun is too humble. Madame Sun has been busy. I haven't seen you for a long time, but you are still as elegant as ever. A cold light flashed through Madame Sun's eyes, but she said with a smile, Master Bai is too kind. As a widow, even Madame Sun had to be careful. What she hated the most was others talking about her appearance. First, as a widow, she could not dress up too beautifully. Second, if someone thought too deeply about her appearance, they would think that she was not a woman. Wang Fei has come. Hearing the voice of the guard at the door, Mo Xiuyao immediately put down Bai and Sun who had been talking and went to greet her. Bai Yunqing and Madame Sun looked over curiously. They wanted to see what this Princess Ding, who was famous in the world and had caused Prince Ding to be so affectionate, really looked like. Yi Li was only wearing a light blue robe with dark embroidery today, her hair loosely tied up in a bun. A tasseled hairpin was inserted at an angle. As she moved, the jade bead hanging by her cheek swayed slightly, making her appear even more fragile. When they walked closer, they saw that her face was slightly pale, and there seemed to be a shadow between her brows. It seemed that Prince Ding was not lying when he said that Wang Fei was not feeling well. However, the famous Princess Ding was not known for her beauty, but for her talent and martial arts. The two of them had not seen her when she entered the city that day, so they did not dare to believe it. How could the Princess Ding, who was said to be skilled in battle, be such a delicate young woman? Chapter 694. Lily, are you still not feeling well? I'll have Zhua Jing bring a doctor in from outside the city for you to take a look. Looking at Yi Li's haggard appearance compared to yesterday, Mo Xiuyao pulled her into his arms with worry and carefully held her waist. Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "It's nothing. I just didn't sleep well last night." As expected, without I to take care of you, Lily can't sleep well. Hearing this, Mo Xiuyao instantly became smug. Ignoring Yi Li's thoughts, he said firmly, "I should stay tonight to take care of Lily, otherwise, Lily won't be able to sleep well again. Right now, there is no one to take care of her. How can I be at ease with Lily alone?" Yi Li glared helplessly at Mo Xiuyao and then looked faintly at Bai Yunqing and Sun Furen. Bai Yunqing and Sun Furen didn't think wrongly. They just thought that Princess Ding was sick and was worried that she would pass her illness on to Prince Ding, so they lived in separate rooms. At the same time, they were surprised that Prince Ding was so attentive and willing to be a servant for Wang Fei. But Bai Yunqing was worried and Sun Furen was envious. "Greetings to Wang Fei." The two stood and said in unison. Yi Li nodded and smiled faintly. "By family head, Sun Furen, no need to be so courteous." The two thanked Yi Li. Yi Li said, "I've prepared tea and refreshments in front. Why don't you come over and sit for a while?" The two didn't refuse and respectfully invited Mo Xiuyao and Yi Li to go first. Actually, after turning a corner, tea and refreshments were placed on the stone table. The host and guests sat down. Sun Furen looked at Yi Li and asked with concern, "Wang Fei's complexion is not good. Are you not feeling well?" Bai Yunqing naturally wouldn't let Sun Furen be the only one in the limelight. He smiled and said, "This one has a few skilled doctors in my fu. Why don't I send them over for Wang Fei to use?" Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "Thank you for your concern. It's probably because you haven't rested well in the Emperor of Xiling City. It's not a problem." This was not Yi Li's excuse. Other than the slight injury she suffered when she was pregnant with Mo Xiaobao and when she gave birth to him, her body had always been in excellent condition. Over the past few years, Xin Yang and Dr. Lin had carefully nursed him back to health, and he had already recovered. In this short period of time, his heart was vexed for no reason, but his body really didn't feel any discomfort. Yi Li had always believed that every medicine had a side effect. If she wasn't sick, she naturally wouldn't go see a doctor. Madame Sun said, "Glass City and the Imperial City are very far apart, and the climate is also quite different. It was normal for the princess consort not to be used to it. My residence is quite proficient in the art of nourishing food. When I return, I will order someone to deliver the recipe. Why don't the princess consort try it?" Madame Sun said this. Yi Li didn't refuse and only thanked her with a smile. Bai Yunqing also smiled and said, "My residence's chef is very proficient in Eastern Chu's dishes. The princess consort probably isn't used to Xiling's food. When I return, I will send someone over for the princess consort to order. I'm not that weak. How would I dare trouble Master Bai?" Yi Li said. Bai Yunqing smiled and said, "To be able to serve the princess consort is their fortune." Yi Li wasn't someone who didn't know how to manage affairs. She accepted the Sun family's goodwill, so she couldn't ignore the Bai family. The art of balance was never something that could be done according to one's wishes. She didn't refuse and nodded, saying, "Then I thank Master Bai." Bai Yunqing hurriedly said that he didn't dare. Mo Xiuyao held the teacup in one hand and held Yi Li's hand under the table with the other. He frowned slightly at the slight coldness of the touch. Li's body had always been good. Now that her constitution was slightly cold, it was naturally not a good thing. she really should have a good nourishment. Therefore, her expression towards Sun and Bai became more relaxed. The four of them chatted idly as they drank tea. They were the guests and the host. If one didn't look at the hidden struggle between Bai Yunqing and Madame Sunday rather than an open struggle, it was more accurate to say that Bai Yunqing was unilaterally targeting Madame Sunday. Madame Sun was somewhat disinterested in Bai Yunqing. Madame Sun understood that no matter how attentive Bai Yunqing was now, the Bai family would offend Princess Ding sooner or later. This was something that had been decided from the very beginning of the Bai family's nature. The Bai family had been a family of concubines since the founding of Xiling. To put it simply, they had climbed up along the belt of their skirts. The Bai family had almost never produced any amazing big shots, but in the history of the Bai family, there had been several prime ministers and many senior officials. All of this depended on the status of the Bai family's daughter in the harem. Therefore, although the Bai family had always been a prominent family in Xiling, the families with real ability and heritage secretly looked down on them. Now the Bai family had sought refuge with the Prince Ding mansion. However, the Bai family, including Bai Yunqing, was not a powerful genius. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been casually suppressed by Genom of Gojoseon for so many years. They had a legitimate empress, but they still couldn't make a comeback. If the Bai family wanted to regain a high status in the Prince Ding mansion and restore the glory of the past, they could only continue to move forward along the path that they had taken. And there was no doubt that this would inevitably offend the Prince Ding mansion and the Su family. Therefore, Madame Sun didn't feel the need to fight with Bai Yunqing in front of Prince Ding and Princess Ding. She didn't want the Prince Ding and the princess to feel that she was aggressive. But Bai Yunqing didn't think so. In Bai Yunqing's opinion, it was unbearable to let Madame Sun, a widow, suppress him in front of Prince Ding. What's more, the hatred between the Sun family and the Bai family couldn't be resolved. If the Sun family was valued, they would definitely take revenge for these years. In this case, it was better for the Bai family to take the initiative. Before noon, Bai Yunqing and Madame Sun consciously got up and left. Before leaving, Madame Sun invited Yili to attend an autumn flower party for womenfolk in the capital 2 days later. Although the Emperor of Xiling was about to change hands, the dignitaries in the imperial city didn't cower at home because of this. Instead, they gathered more frequently. The leaders and mistresses of each family gathered together to inquire about the plans and intentions of other families. Families with good relationships by marriage took the opportunity to discuss their own retreat plans and so on. All of these needed to be carried out through various banquets. After all, although the Emperor of Xiling was about to move south, most of the power in Xiling City was still in the hands of the Emperor of Xiling. Especially those who had disloyalty and other plans, few dared to visit Prince Ding openly like the Bai family and the Sun family. Yili had a good impression of this generous and free Madame Sunday. She also understood that the intention of holding the so-called autumn flower party at this time was naturally not just to enjoy the flowers. After all, there were no flowers to enjoy in autumn in Xiling. After thinking about it, she agreed. Madame Sun also left happily. When Bai Yunqing heard this, he secretly planned to implement the plan as soon as possible. When Bai Yunqing returned to the mansion, Madame Bai, who had been waiting for a long time, immediately greeted him and asked with concern, "Master, have you seen Prince Ding and Princess Ding?" Bai Yunqing nodded. Seeing this, Madame Bai showed some joy and smiled, "Then the people we sent over." Bai Yunqing snorted and said coldly, "A bunch of trash. I'm afraid it bodes ill rather than well." Hearing this, Madame Bai's heart trembled. It should be known that the few people who were sent over a few days ago were not really servants. Among them, there were 3 Bai family's illegitimate sons and daughters. This Prince Ding is actually so ruthless. But these few days, there are also many families sending people over. Why is it only our family? Madame Bai recovered from her shock after being shocked. Although the few people sent over were the children of the Bai family, they were not her biological children. Naturally, she didn't feel sorry for them. But she was more worried about whether Prince Ding was dissatisfied with the Bai family. Chapter 695. Bai Yunqing frowned and pondered for a moment. He said uncertainly, maybe. Prince Ding found out the identities of those people? Is that why he is unhappy? Bai Yunqing was also the head of the family. Naturally, he understood some taboos as a superior. Madame Bai sighed helplessly and said, "We have indeed thought too simply. The secret guards of Prince Ding's residence are well informed. I'm afraid we can't hide it from them." But she didn't know that if Prince Ding's residents wanted to investigate, they would naturally be able to find out. However, the few people sent by the Bai family were unlucky and happened to meet Mo Xiuyao's blade. They died mysteriously without even seeing him. Today, I went to visit Prince Ding and happened to meet the woman of the Sun family. Thinking of Madame Sun's smile before she left, Bai Yunqing's face became gloomier. Madame Bai's face also changed. Many noble ladies in the Emperor of Xiling City had always looked down on Madame Sunday. Perhaps it should be said that they were jealous of Madame Sunday. As a woman, she could take charge of the family business like a man. When the head of the Sun family was alive, there were no concubines in his room. Therefore, when the head of the Sun family passed away, many women in Xiling City secretly gloated and covered their mouths to laugh. However, Madame Sun was not as down and out as they thought. Instead, she supported the entire Sun family with just a single woman and child, and even made the Sun family rise to a higher level than before. How could this not make Madame Bai, a woman who could only live in the backyard, hate and envy her? That woman. Why did she go to see Prince Ding? Could it be? Madame Bai screamed. Bai Yunqing saw his wife's expression and knew that she had misunderstood. However, he was not in the mood to explain for Madame Sunday. He just said in a low voice, "Prince Ding and Princess Ding have a good impression of Madame Sunday." Princess Ding also promised to attend the Autumn Flower Festival in 2 days. Madame Bai was not ignorant. She asked softly, "What do you mean, master?" Bai Yunqing said in a low voice, "You go 2 days later. You must make a good impression on Princess Ding. Also, bring Ning with you." "Master." Madame Bai frowned as she looked at Bai Yunqing. She hesitated for a moment before saying, "I'm afraid it won't be easy to start with Princess Ding." Although she didn't know much about the outside world, Madame Bai was a woman after all. She naturally understood the thoughts of women more than a man like Bai Yunqing. If they wanted to send the women of the Bai family to the Prince Ding mansion, they would not be able to do it through Princess Ding. Prince Ding and Princess Consort were deeply in love. Even after being married for many years, Prince Ding had never taken a concubine. No matter what, Princess Ding would not like a woman who wanted to enter the Prince Ding mansion to fight for her husband. However, Bai Yunqing did not mind. "Madam, you're thinking too much. I also saw Princess Ding today. Although her beauty is outstanding, our Ning is also not bad. Moreover, Princess Ding was born in the Su family, which is also a famous family. How would she not know how to be a wife? Most women in West Hill are arrogant and domineering. Our Ning is gentle and obedient, so Princess Consort will naturally think highly of her. If Prince Ding wants to settle down Xiling in a short period of time, he will definitely need to marry a Xiling noble lady as his concubine to pacify Xiling's nobles. The Bai family had many concubines in the past generations. The men were not really useless. At least in terms of how to seize the opportunity to send their women to the top, the Bai family was quite knowledgeable. The Mahist army had just taken over West Hill, so it was inevitable that people were nervous. And Prince Ding obviously could not stay in the Emperor of Xiling for a long time. Therefore, it was necessary to marry a West Hill noble's daughter as his concubine to appease the people. In Bai Yunqing's opinion, the most suitable candidate was the daughter of the Bai family. Madame Bai sighed helplessly. How could she tell her master? The more powerful a woman was, the more she could not tolerate other people around her husband. But thinking that her daughter was raised according to the standards of the emperor's concubine, perhaps there would be no problem. Mississippi, the sound of a servant girl bowing came from outside the door. Before she finished speaking, a beautiful woman in a colorful dress walked slowly into the hall and bowed to Bai Yunqing and Madame Bai. Ning greets father and mother. In terms of appearance alone, this woman didn't seem to be a heavenly beauty. At least she was inferior to Su Zuidi, who had also lived in the Bai family. But she was comparable to Princess Lingyun. But her eyebrows were black and her red lips were slightly curved in a smile. Compared to Princess Lingyun's arrogance, it was easier for people to feel close to her. This woman was the only unmarried daughter of the Bai family, Bai Qingning. When Madame Bai saw her daughter, a trace of affection flashed through her eyes. She quickly helped her up and said, Ning, why are you here? Bai Qingning smiled and said, I heard that father had returned from visiting Prince Ding and Princess Ding, so I came to pay my respects to father. Father, did you really see Princess Ding? When Bai Yunqing saw his favorite daughter, his expression softened. He nodded and said with a smile, That's right, father did see Princess Ding. Then, Bai Qingning asked curiously, It is said that Princess Ding is one of the greatest heroines in the world. What does she look like? Bai Yunqing shook his head and sighed. Princess Ding is also a peerless beauty. Prince Ding is really lucky. Bai Yunqing's words were not false. Most of the women in the world were weak. Perhaps some who could take care of the inner chambers well were already considered virtuous. Those who could interfere with the outer chambers were mostly unruly. As for those who could lead troops on the battlefield, in the eyes of the world, they were about the same as female Rakshasas and female Yakshas. And this Princess Ding, whether it was in the politics of the Prince Ding mansion or on the battlefield, was quite impressive. What was even rarer was that she was born with an elegant, gentle, and delicate appearance. It was no wonder that Prince Ding treated her like a treasure. Bai Qingning's eyes flashed and she said softly, Then could it be that Princess Ding is even more beautiful than Aunt Bai Long? Su Zuidi had stayed in the Bai family for a short period of time. After that, Bai Qingning often went in and out of the palace and saw her a few times. She only felt that she was the most beautiful woman in the world. Even though she was proud of her appearance, she knew that she could not compare to her. Could it be that this Princess Ding was even more beautiful than her, and that was why Prince Ding was so affectionate? Bai Yunqing shook his head and said with a smile, That's not true. Although Princess Ding is beautiful, Mei Ning is not bad. Is that so? Bai Qingning lowered her eyes and replied in a daze. Bai Yunqing looked at his daughter with satisfaction and ordered with a smile, Ning, go and prepare well. In 2 days, accompany your mother to attend the Autumn Flower Festival. Bai Qingning was surprised, Autumn Flower Festival. That's right, Bai Yunqing stroked his beard and said with a smile, Ning, aren't you curious about what Princess Ding looks like? In 2 days, Princess Ding will also attend the Autumn Flower Festival. Ning can go and see Princess Ding. Isn't that great? Bai Qingning's eyes lit up and she nodded with a smile, Father is right. Princess Ding is the role model of all women in the world. I have admired her for a long time. If I can see her, it will be the fortune of 3 lifetimes. Bai Yunqing smiled, That's great. Ning, go. Chapter 696. 2 days later the Autumn Flower Festival was held in the largest flower garden in the southwest of the Emperor of Xiling. Supposedly, this flower garden had originally belonged to the Emperor of Xiling's family. Later, it had been bestowed to a certain prince. Later, the Wang Fu declined, but the imperial family did not take it back. Instead, it flowed into the common people. In the last decade, it had fallen into the hands of the Sun family. Compared to the blooming flowers of Dechu State, Xiling did not have many famous flowers to admire at this time. However, there was still an endless stream of noblewomen who came to the flower festival, even more than in the past. At the entrance to the garden, Sun Furen had been waiting with people outside for a long time. The noblewomen who came and went had naturally heard the news that the Sun family was now attached to the Prince Ding mansion. With Sun Furen's status, there was no need to say who could make her personally wait at the door. Many people who had the same thoughts as the Sun family but were a step behind also waited at the door with Sun Furen. Yili always had a sense of time and did not like to have people wait for her outside for a long time. So not long after, the Prince Ding mansion's carriage came from the corner of the street. There were black cloud riders dressed in black from the front, back, left, and right. The carriage in the middle of the black cloud riders was simple in appearance, unlike the luxurious carriages of the imperial family and the royal family. The carriage stopped at the entrance to the flower garden. Sun Furen hurriedly led people forward and said with a smile, "Huinyang welcomes Wang Fei." Walking on the left side of the carriage, Qin Feng dismounted and lifted the curtain. The womenfolk all looked towards the carriage, wanting to see what Princess Ding looked like. They saw a white figure walk out of the carriage. White robes, white hair, cold and handsome. Who else could it be but Prince Ding? Prince Ding jumped off the carriage and then reached out with a hand. He said with a smile, "Li, we're here." He reached out his hand to help Yili out of the carriage. Before Yili could jump off the carriage herself, he reached out his hand to lift Yili up by the waist and gently placed her on the ground. Seeing Mo Xiaoyao, Mrs. Sun was also a little surprised. Because today's flower banquet was only for women, but when Prince Ding wanted to come, no one dared to stop him from entering. She went forward hesitantly, "Your Highness, Princess Consort, this." Mo Xiaoyao waved his hand and calmly said, "I am only sending Wang Fei over. I will soon enter the palace to meet the Emperor of Xiling. I will not disturb Sun Furen." Hearing this, Madame Sun secretly heaved a sigh of relief. One had to know that there were quite a number of nobles in West Hill who had some thoughts about Prince Ding. Yili smiled faintly and said, "Madam, please." The group of people followed Yili and Madame Sun into the flower park. It immediately became much quieter outside the door. There was a carriage parked on the side of the road not far from the gate. Sitting in the carriage was the Madame and daughter of the Bai family, Bai Qingning. When they arrived, they had seen the carriage of the Prince Ding mansion coming over. Naturally, they could only move to the side and let the carriage of the Prince Ding mansion pass first. Ning Seeing her daughter in a daze, Madame Bai said worriedly. Bai Qingning looked up and asked, "Was that Prince Ding just now?" Madame Bai nodded and said, "It is said that Prince Ding has a head of white hair. I think it is him." Bai Qingning nodded and sighed softly, "I didn't expect Prince Ding to be so young. It is a pity that his white hair. If he did not have that head of white hair, how elegant would Prince Ding be when his hair was like clouds?" In the flower park, Madame Sun walked with Yili. Although it was already early winter in Xiling, there were not many flowers in the garden. Even the most common flowers in Dechu State in autumn and winter were rarely seen in Xiling. However, the Sun family still decorated the flower park beautifully. Many places were decorated with silk flowers. It was one of the vibrant green trees and red flowers. Because the weather was already cold, the location of the banquet was moved from the garden to a water pavilion in the corner of the flower park. The water pavilion was hollow on all sides and covered only by thin muslin. People sat inside to drink and make merry, but they could clearly see the singing and dancing performances outside. Yili was naturally invited to the highest seat. While there were high officials and even princesses and commanderies among the noblewomen present, everyone knew that the imperial city had changed owners long ago. The beautiful woman in blue robes in front of them was the future owner of the imperial city. Therefore, no one was unhappy about it. As the host and guests sat down, Yili looked around. While she did not recognize most of the people present, she could see some from their clothing. It seemed that Madame Sun's business methods were good. It had to be said that many of the people present were not people that merchants could invite. Everyone, do not pay attention to me. Today's gathering is fate. Everyone, just drink and be merry. Seeing that everyone was a bit uneasy, Yili said with a smile. But while she said this, how could these noblewomen with their own thoughts not be restrained? Madame Sun said with a smile, Wang Fei is right. If there is anything that is lacking in hospitality, please forgive me. Everyone hurriedly exchanged pleasantries, and the atmosphere gradually became harmonious. Many people were secretly looking at Ding Wang Fei, who was sitting at the head seat, only to see that she didn't seem to be even 20 years old. Her features were picturesque, elegant and graceful. Her every move seemed to flow with a faint noble light that people were not willing to look at. Such elegance, she was like a beauty from an ancient painting. It was hard for people to think of the legendary heroine who could gallop on the battlefield. After some examination, many people who had planned to send their girls to the Prince Ding mansion became depressed. In terms of appearance, the women of West Hill were generally inferior to the women of the Dechu state. Also, Princess Ding was so beautiful, how could their girls have a chance to win Prince Ding's attention? Princess Lingyun has arrived. Madame Bai has arrived. Miss Bai has arrived. Someone announced loudly outside the water pavilion. Everyone hurriedly stood up. No matter when West Hill moved the capital, no matter what kind of thoughts they had, they were still the people of West Hill. So when they saw Princess Lingyun, there was no doubt that they had to greet her as a monarch. Princess Lingyun was still dressed in luxurious clothes. She walked quickly with a proud expression. Madame Bai, who was following behind her, did not look very good. Of course, they knew that the relationship between Princess Ding and Princess Lingyun was not good. Who knew that they would encounter Princess Lingyun after a delay outside, so they had to come in together. They only hoped that Princess Ding would not vent her anger on them because they came with Princess Lingyun. Greetings, Princess. Princess Lingyun snorted softly. She glanced at Yili, who was sitting and drinking tea, and then turned to Madame Sunday. She raised her chin and her sharp eyes were filled with cold anger. Obviously, she had not forgotten that she had been kicked out of the banquet a few days ago. Welcome, Princess. Please take a seat, Madame Sun said with a smile. Princess Lingyun sneered and said, I thought that Madame Sun was also going to kick me out today. Madame Sun smiled in surprise and said, how could it be? Who would dare to chase Princess Lingyun out of the door? Is she still alive? As soon as she said this, everyone present had a strange expression. A few young women could not help but secretly laugh. When Princess Lingyun came back from the Dechu state in disgrace, not only did she not restrain her temper, but she became more and more fierce. The Emperor of Xiling had no choice but to hastily arrange a marriage for her. Unexpectedly, Princess Lingyun might have been provoked in West Hill. In the first month of her marriage, she killed one of her husband's concubines and a little girl in her mother-in-law's courtyard. The reason why she killed the girl was that her husband's mother was so angry that she fell ill and did not want to see her. She ordered the girl not to let her in. Because of this, her husband's mother was so angry that she fainted on the spot. She passed away in less than 2 months. This also became a joke in the Emperor of Xiling City. Princess Lingyun's face was distorted, but she did not lose her temper on the spot. She sneered and said, "In that case, wasn't it Madame Sun's order that I was blocked outside the door a few days ago? Or did Madame Sun want to see if I dare to take your life?" Madame Sun's expression changed slightly and said lightly, "I remember what Princess said. Princess must be clear about the banquet that day." It was a banquet held by the unmarried women in the city. Although there were a few madams who attended, they were all model women with good character to teach the young ladies etiquette and self-cultivation. Even I could not attend such a banquet in person. "I don't know why, Princess." She only said half of this sentence, but it was even more embarrassing than finishing it. Princess Lingyun was already a married woman. She had neither talent nor virtue. Why should she attend such a banquet? Wasn't this asking the unmarried young ladies to follow her example? Chapter 697. Madame Sun's casual words caused Princess Lingyun's face to turn pale. However, Princess Lingyun was not an idiot despite her arrogance. She naturally understood that the Emperor of Xiling was no longer the same as before. Not only did she have to lower her head in front of Princess Ding, Yili, but she could not easily flare up at this widow who had just joined the Prince Ding mansion. She could only snort and walk to a chair with a gloomy face to sit down. Everyone present was a little surprised that Princess Lingyun had swallowed her anger. After the surprise, they understood a little more. After all, the present was different from the past. Even someone as arrogant as Princess Lingyun did not dare to be presumptuous in front of Princess Ding. At the same time, she was even more determined to rely on the Prince Ding mansion. After Princess Lingyun sat down, Madame Bai brought Bai Qingning forward to greet Yili. "Madame Bai and my daughter Qingning greet Princess Ding." Bai Qingning followed behind Madame Bai and gracefully curtsied. "My daughter Qingning greets Princess Ding." This greeting was the formal greeting of a young lady from a scholarly family in Dechu State. It was not the slightest bit off and was quite different from the West Hill noble ladies who had come forward to greet her. Yili raised her eyebrows slightly and said with a smile, "Madame Bai, Miss Bai, no need to be so courteous. I am also a guest. Please feel free to do as you please." Madame Bai smiled and said, "How would I dare? It is the blessing of 3 lifetimes to be able to see the princess consort's beauty today." While Madame Bai and Yili were exchanging greetings, Bai Qingning also took the opportunity to size up the green-clothed woman sitting at the head of the table. She didn't seem to be much older than him, but there was a hint of brilliance and majesty in her elegant and graceful appearance that made people unable to take their eyes off her. Instead, it added a sense of grace and nobility to her beautiful face, causing others to feel ashamed of their inferiority. What kind of person was Yili? Even if she was in the middle of a conversation, how could she not notice Bai Qingning's gaze on her? She couldn't help but smile. "Miss Bai, do you have something to say?" Yili smiled faintly. Bai Qingning was slightly taken aback. She hurriedly stood and said, "Qingning doesn't dare. It's just that I've heard that Wang Fei has galloped on the battlefield and your fame has spread far and wide. Qingning's heart yearns for it, that's why. Qingning is not behaving well. Please forgive me, Princess Consort." Yili waved her hand and smiled, "It's fine. What fame? It's just a rumor. I just followed the prince out of the capital and saw more of it." Bai Qingning's eyes were filled with envy and yearning. She smiled and said, "Wang Fei is too modest. If I could be as carefree as Wang Fei, then I would not have lived in vain." Sitting next to Yili, Sun Furen raised an eyebrow when she heard this. She hugged her daughter in her arms, a hint of an amused smile on her lips. The Bai family had taught their daughters to be empresses and concubines for generations. They had never heard of a daughter who yearned to be carefree. But seeing that Madame Bai was not offended, the smile in Sun Furen's eyes deepened. Yili lowered her head to sip tea, the smile on her face fading slightly. If this was a normal time, she would really like this woman. But in the past few days, her mood and even her view of people seemed to have been affected. Facing this smiling, elegant and cheerful woman in front of her, she did not have the slightest good impression of her. In reality, it was not that Yili did not know what the people present were thinking, but she did not care. Since she and Mo Xiaoyao were in this kind of position, they could not avoid encountering this kind of problem. They were all doing it for their own benefit. She did not like them because of their own standpoints, but she did not feel that they were guilty. But it was a pity. If she and Mo Xiaoyao did not have any feelings for each other, she would not mind being a virtuous consort in name. But they had experienced so many things and had such deep feelings. Then she could only say sorry to these people. Mo Xiaoyao was hers alone. The atmosphere in the water pavilion was slightly cold. Sitting at the side, Princess Lingyun snorted disdainfully. She came from the palace and was more domineering and scheming than normal people. How could she not know what the Bai family was planning? But it was a pity that Yili was not someone who was so easily manipulated. Princess Lingyun, who was almost 30 years old, had married a long time ago. The infatuation of the past had been worn away by time. What was left was not infatuation with Mo Xiaoyao, but unwillingness to accept Yili. Thus, she knew what kind of person Yili was. Back then, Yili, who had just married at the age of 14 or 15, dared to show no mercy to her, the Princess Ding of West Hill. Now that she had experienced many hardships and matured, how could she tolerate other women coveting what she owned? The Bai family's plan was destined to fail. The West Hill had not been destroyed yet, and these people were rushing to seek refuge with the Prince Ding mansion. They all deserved to die. After a while, Yili said with a faint smile, "This is nothing. I have always felt that it is not a good thing for a girl to be locked up in the boudoir. If Miss Bai is interested, I can tell the Bai family head to let Miss Bai go out and gain experience. It is not a bad idea." Gain experience. Bai Qingning was startled. She did not understand why she was suddenly talking about this. And she did not really want to go out and gain experience. She was different from Princess Ding. Although she was a girl of West Hill, she did not have the strength to truss a chicken. How could she endure the hardships of the wind and frost? Yili said with a smile, "Isn't that so? I still remember, the first time I went out was to Nanjiang. I seemed to be around 15 or 16 years old. I am about the same age as Miss Bai." Bai Qingning could not maintain the smile on her face. She looked worriedly at Madame Bai, afraid that Yili would really throw her to Nanjiang. She had only read about Nanjiang in books. How could she go to a place with barren hills and unruly rivers? Madame Sun, who was watching the show, said with a smile, "Princess is right. What I regret most is that I have not been able to leave the Emperor of Xiling City in this life. In the future, when Xiaofu is older, I will not restrict her like this." The other people also hurriedly praised Princess Ding's wisdom, but no one cared about it in their hearts. Although the West Hill was not as strict as the Dechu state in restricting their daughters, the young ladies were all pampered as they grew up. No one planned to throw their daughters out to suffer. However, many people secretly thought that Princess Ding was indeed extraordinary since she could travel to Nanjiang at the age of 15 or 16. They could not help but suppress the idea of sending their daughters to the Prince Ding mansion. Everyone sat and chatted with Yili for a while. After drinking some tea, they all got up and went to the garden in groups of 3 or 5. Yili naturally could not avoid the custom. Madame Sun and Madame Bai accompanied her to stroll in the garden. Looking at the colorful silk flowers on both sides of the road, Yili could not help but smile and say, "Madame is clever. No wonder the Sun family is becoming more and more prosperous in your hands." Madame Sun held Sun Xiaofu's hand and said with a smile, West Hill is in the western region and the climate is cold. Not to mention the Dechu state, it is not even comparable to Lee City. There are not many flowers and plants in the 4 seasons. Now it is like this because there is no other choice. I have embarrassed myself in front of Princess. Yili smiled faintly. Bai Qingning, who was following beside her, smiled and said, "Does Princess like flowers and plants? My residence has many flowers and plants from the Dechu state and the western region. Why don't I give them to Princess for you to see tomorrow?" Yili glanced sideways at Bai Qingning, who was smiling peacefully. She shook her head and said with a smile, "Taking what others like is not the conduct of a gentleman. Besides, I am not a refined person. It would be a waste to give them to me." Chapter 698. Bai Qingning covered her mouth and laughed. Princess Consort is Mr. Qingyun's granddaughter. If Princess Consort is not a refined person, then we are vulgar. Madame Sun looked at Bai Qingning with a faint smile and said to Madame Bai, "Madam, your daughter really knows how to talk. If this was said to me, I would be so happy that I would be dizzy." The smile on Madame Bai's face froze and she said lightly, "Madame Sun is joking. How can a little girl like her compare to Madame Sun's glib tongue?" Madame Sun chuckled and said, "I am not joking. Who doesn't know that the Bai family's girls have never been glib? Otherwise, how could they be the emperor's concubine?" Madame Bai's face turned green and she glared at Madame Sunday. Madame Sun did not care and continued to hold her daughter's hand and talk with Yili as they walked. "Princess Consort, 4th young master requests to see you," the guard behind her reported. "4th brother." Yili was surprised. Today's banquet was for women and it was not suitable for men to enter. Even Mo Xiaoyao had left after sending her to the door. But Yili also knew that if it was not something important, Su Qingbai would not have come to find her at this time. "Madame Sun, is it convenient?" Madame Sun thought and said with a smile, "4th young master is a good man. It is not inconvenient. Why don't Princess Consort wait for 4th young master at the pavilion in front?" Yili nodded and said, "Okay." Not long after, Su Qingbai was led by the guard in a hurry. "Li, 4th brother, did something happen?" Yili asked worriedly. Su Qingbai glanced at the women beside him and thought that it was not a secret. He said directly, "My mother came to West Hill." "What?" Yili was stunned and did not understand what had happened. After a while, she recovered and asked, "First aunt, why did First aunt come to West Hill?" Su Qingbai smiled bitterly and said in a low voice, "I don't know how my mother found out that I was in West Hill some time ago. I just received a letter from Big Brother. Mother had already set off from Glass City half a month ago. She should be arriving soon." Yili composed herself and said, "Since Big Brother and Uncle both know about it, then eldest aunt's safety shouldn't be a problem. I'll send someone to pick up First aunt. 4th brother, you don't have to worry." Su Qingbai smiled a little helplessly. Seeing Yili's puzzled expression, he told her frankly, "I still have to stay in West Hill for a long time. At that time, I'm afraid that Mother. Li, please help me persuade Mother." Yili finally understood. Previously, she and Mo Xiaoyao had also discussed who would be in charge of the West Hill after they left. It seemed that Mo Xiaoyao had already decided. Moreover, Su Qingbai had experience in governing a place and his achievements seemed to be very good. These few years in the northwest, he had also managed the barren land in the north very well. It was indeed suitable for him to handle it. Yili finally understood why First aunt had rushed over without any fear of danger. 4th brother's stay in West Hill was not something that could be accomplished in a short period of time. It might even take 3 to 5 years. Now that 4th brother was not young anymore, if he did not return to Glass City for 3 to 5 years, First Aunt would be worried to death. Yili covered her mouth and laughed secretly. She nodded and said, "Fourth brother, I understand. I'll talk to First Aunt properly." Su Qingbai heaved a sigh of relief and nodded, "Thank you, Li." After they finished talking about serious matters, Su Qingbai also relaxed. He nodded to Madame Sun and said, "Qingbai has disturbed you. Please forgive me." Madame Sun smiled and said, "Fourth young master, you're exaggerating." "Madame Su, if there's anything I can help you with, fourth young master and princess consort, please speak your mind." Su Qingbai thought about it and indeed needed Madame Sun's help. He did not stand on ceremony and said with a smile, "My mother may be staying in West Hill for a long time. It's not very appropriate for her to stay in the inn." Madame Sun understood and smiled. "It seems that fourth young master will be in West Hill for a long time. Let the West Hill ladies." These days, there are many houses in the city that want to be sold. I will keep an eye out for you. Although there were many noble families who wanted to rely on Princess Ding, there were also many people who wanted to follow the Emperor of Xiling to the south. Many houses in the imperial city had to be sold. Su Qingbai cupped his hands and smiled. "In that case, I'll have to trouble you, madam." Using the excuse that Madame Su was coming, Yili sat for a while and then got up to leave with Su Qingbai. Originally, with her identity, she did not have to attend this banquet from the beginning to the end. Showing her face and exchanging a few words with these noble ladies was already polite enough. Moreover, she felt a little uncomfortable after sending them off for a while. Madame Sun did not dare to stay for long and also got up to send them out. When they reached the door, Yili turned back and said, "Madam, I won't send you off anymore. Please stay." Madame Sun did not stand on ceremony. She nodded and smiled. "In that case, princess, take care. Goodbye." Yili nodded and turned to walk to the carriage. "Princess, be careful." A silver light flashed in the sunlight. Yili reflexively avoided it. An arrow shot past her and nailed into the carriage beside her. The guards around immediately protected Yili and Su Qingbai in the middle. A group of men dressed in different clothes but covered their faces jumped down from the roofs of various street corners and rushed in the direction of Yili. The guards of the Prince Ding mansion did not hesitate to meet them head-on. The two sides soon fell into a group of fighting. Yili was protected in the middle. She could see clearly that although these people dressed in different colors, their skills were not bad. They had obviously been trained. But for a while, she could not think of anyone in the Emperor of Xiling City who would have such an elite force and wanted to assassinate her except for the Emperor of Xiling. These people came suddenly. The noble ladies who stood at the door and did not have time to enter suffered. Although they did not come for them, it was inevitable that there would be fish caught in the crossfire. A maidservant was stabbed to death by a sword and fell right in front of Madame Sunday. Madame Sun was so scared that her face turned pale, but she still held her frightened and screaming daughter tightly and retreated to a corner. She shouted, "Hurry up and capture the assassin." This banquet was a gathering of the powerful women in the city. Naturally, it was impossible for there to be no guards to protect them. However, these guards were obviously not the assassin's opponents. They suffered heavy casualties as soon as they fought. A guard's face was slashed by a saber and he fell toward the door. He landed right next to Bai Qingning. No matter how calm Bai Qingning was, she was still a 16 or 17-year-old girl. She screamed in fright, her voice even higher than Sun Xiaofu's. An assassin not far from her heard her scream and turned around to shoot a willow leaf dart. Bai Qingning's eyes widened, but she could not move her body. She could only close her eyes and wait for death. Ding! There was a clear sound of impact. The willow leaf dart that should have been nailed into her body fell to the ground. There was also a red hairpin that was broken in two. Bai Qingning clearly remembered that it was the red hairpin that Princess Ding had worn. She quickly looked in the direction of Yili. She saw Yili and Su Qingbai were protected by people by the carriage. Although the surroundings were chaotic, the two were still clean. She didn't know where she got the courage, but Bai Qingning rushed in the direction of Yili. Perhaps she was lucky that her life was not meant to end. She actually managed to rush in front of Yili and Su Qingbai. Wang Fei. Chapter 699. Seeing that she was quite frightened and that she was already here, she couldn't just throw her out. Yili motioned for the guards to let her come over. Walking in front of Yili and Su Qingbai, Bai Qingning finally gave a sigh of relief. She said in a trembling voice, "Wang Fei, these people," Yili said faintly, "don't be afraid. It'll be fine soon." Seeing Yili's calm appearance, Bai Qingning wanted to say something else, but she could only close her mouth. She could only look at everything in front of her in terror, her eyes filled with fear. These assassins did not seem to fear death and did not pay attention to the people around them. They only charged towards Yili with all their might, looking like they would not stop until they reached their goal. There were many guards in the Prince Ding mansion, but there were even more assassins. These assassins clearly knew that they did not have much time, so their attacks were even more ruthless. There were even a few people who used their lives to hold back one of the Prince Ding mansion guards so that their companions could charge forward. If this was any other time, Yili would praise these people for their bravery, but the situation right now was very unfavorable for them. Finally, someone broke through the guards and charged towards Yili. Yili pushed Su Qingbai aside and said, "Fourth brother, leave quickly." Su Qingbai knew that he did not know martial arts. If he stayed, he would only be a burden to Yili. He nodded and said, "Leave her, you have to be careful." Yili nodded and moved her head to dodge the assassin's sword. There was a flash of silver in her sleeve and a flash of blood. The hand holding the long sword fell to the ground. The pungent smell of blood caused Yili to frown in discomfort. She did not show any mercy as the dagger flew towards the assassin's heart, instantly killing both the assassin and her subordinate. A guard pulled Su Qingbai out, and Bai Qingning, who was beside him, quickly rushed forward. "Young Master Su! Young Master Su, take me with you." The blood of the assassin who had his hand chopped off by Yili and then stabbed to death had spilled all over her body. She was already filled with fear, unable to bear it. Seeing Su Qingbai leave, she hurriedly grabbed onto him. Su Qingbai frowned slightly and could only pull her up. However, these assassins clearly knew Su Qingbai's identity. They quickly surrounded him and forced him in the direction of Yili. The guards had to protect Su Qingbai and deal with the assassins at the same time. Gradually, they found themselves in dire straits and in danger again and again. Su Qingbai said in a deep voice, "Life and death are predestined. You don't have to care about us. Just focus on the enemy." The bodyguard beside him also understood that if he died, Su Qingbai, who did not know martial arts, would also die. Gradually, Su Qingbai and Bai Qingning were forced back to Yili by the assassins. Yili brandished the long sword she had snatched from the assassin's hands. She knocked one of the assassins aside with a frown and asked, "Why haven't you left yet?" "Qin Feng, take fourth brother away first." Qin Feng was currently surrounded by several assassins. Even though he heard Yili's orders, he was unable to break free in a short time. Su Qingbai pulled Bai Qingning, who was clinging on to his clothes, back to the side. He did his best to maintain a distance from Yili. He said helplessly with a wry smile, It seems like I've implicated you." Yili's long sword was like the wind as she smiled faintly and said, "Fourth brother, what nonsense are you saying? Aren't I the one who's implicated you? Yi Li's swordsmanship had been personally taught by Imo Xiuyao. Even though it could not be considered perfect, it was still very good. For a moment, the assassins could not do anything to her. However, Yi Li gradually frowned slightly. Her abdomen was a little painful and fine beads of sweat gradually appeared by her ears. Originally, Yi Li's strength should not be so weak, but at this moment, she did not have the time to care about the reason. When the assassins detected that Yi Li's movements had slowed, they were naturally overjoyed. The few of them pounced on Yi Li. They were here for Yi Li's life. As long as they could kill Yi Li, they would be able to destroy half of the Prince Ding mansion and even Prince Ding. Even if all of them did not return, it was still worth it. Yi Li calmed herself down and swung her sword, causing a bloody light to appear. However, the pain in her abdomen made her feel extremely weak. She even felt cold. Princess. Qin Feng broke free from the assassins and also detected Yi Li's discomfort. He hurriedly flew over and reached out to support Yi Li. Yi Li grabbed his shoulder and said, "Take fourth brother out first." Qin Feng frowned and said in a deep voice, "No, this subordinate will take Princess out first." Even though he did not know where Princess was injured, but he could see that Princess was in great discomfort. Not far away, Bai Qingning rushed over in panic and shouted, "Take me away. I beg you, take me away." Qin Feng impatiently raised his hand to slap her, but he heard a strong gust of wind. "Yi Li, give me your life." 3 shining long swords stabbed at Yi Li. Qin Feng swung his sword to block 2 of the swords in front of Yi Li. The other sword couldn't help but sway towards Bai Qingning. Bai Qingning screamed and reached out to pull at the person next to her, but she just happened to grab onto Yi Li's clothes. Yi Li was already in great discomfort and couldn't stand steadily. She was completely relying on Qin Feng to support her. With this pull, she was sent under the blades. Princess. Li, Yi Li managed to raise her hand and the dagger in her hand dissipated the power of the sword. Her entire body left Qin Feng's support and fell onto Bai Qingning's body. When the assassin's sword missed, a second sword immediately followed. Princess. Qin Feng was entangled and it was too late to help. He could only throw the long sword in his hand at that person, but it was too late. That person's long sword was already stabbing towards Yi Li. Bai Qingning's face was pale and she quickly let go. Just as the tip of the sword was about to pierce Yi Li's body, a jade-colored figure rushed over and blocked in front of Yi Li. With a splash, warm blood landed on Yi Li's face. Yi Li's eyes widened. "See, fourth brother." Chapter 700. Yi Li looked dazedly at Su Qingbai who was blocking in front of her. A long sword came from behind her. Blood flowed down the tip of the sword and onto Yi Li's clothes. Drops of blood fell onto her jade-like face. Li, Su Qingbai grimaced helplessly. The sharp pain that came clearly caused his body to involuntarily convulse. Qin Feng who was behind him finally pulled his hand out. But when he saw the scene in front of him that made his heart tremble in fear, he casually dodged the long sword in the hand of a person beside him and swung it at that person. The assassin who had wanted to pull out his sword and give another blow was instantly cut in two by Qin Feng's sharp sword energy. Wang Fei. Fourth young master. Seeing that something had happened here, the other guards all gathered over. Actually, this was also their mistake. Everyone had seen Wang Fei's skills, so most of their attention had been placed on killing the enemy. They hadn't thought that Wang Fei would have an accident. At this time, the guards had gathered and narrowed the encirclement. Even though there was no benefit to killing these assassins, it made it difficult for these assassins to charge through. Qin Feng scanned the surroundings before going forward to ask, "Wang Fei, you Yili bit her lips and said in a low voice, "I'm fine. How is 4th Ge?" Qin Feng also saw that the assassin had not injured Wang Fei. Most of the blood on Wang Fei's body was Su Qingbai's. And Su Qingbai had sunk into a semi-unconscious state. Calming himself, Qin Feng carefully inspected Su Qingbai's wounds. Only then did he release a breath. He tapped a few acupuncture points on Su Qingbai's body and said, "It didn't hit any vital parts, but 4th young master is bleeding too much. You need to quickly stop the bleeding and bandage it, otherwise." But they were surrounded by assassins and had no way of charging out. This subordinate has already released the signal. The guards in the city will quickly arrive. Seeing Yi Li's pale face, Qin Feng said in a low voice. Yi Li nodded. She carefully supported Su Qingbai so that his wound wouldn't bleed again. The guards of the Prince Ding mansion in the city were not satisfied. Soon, a large group of people arrived. The leaders were Feng Zhiyao and Su Qingfeng. Su Qingfeng charged into the encirclement. When he saw Su Qingbai covered in blood, his eyes turned red. 4th brother. Li, Princess consort, 4th young master. Feng Zhiyao, who had followed closely behind, also felt his heart tighten. Seeing that Yi Li was safe and sound, he calmed down slightly. Originally, he and Su Qingfeng had nothing to do and were resting in the relay station. However, they did not expect to see Qin Feng's signal. They hurriedly brought their men and horses to the scene, but it was already a bloody mess. Feng Zhiyao's eyes flashed coldly. Kill. Just leave 2 of them alive. Seeing Feng Zhiyao and Su Qingfeng, Yi Li also let out a breath. She felt her vision darken. She grabbed Su Qingfeng with one hand and said, "3rd brother, send 4th brother to the medical hall, go quickly." Su Qingfeng nodded with a heavy face. "I know." He bent down to pick up Su Qingbai. Carefully avoiding the sword on his body, he stood up and walked out under the protection of several guards. Yi Li also stood up with the support of Feng Zhiyao and Qin Feng. However, when her body that had been seriously uncomfortable relaxed, she felt even colder. Her vision darkened and she fell to the ground. Princess consort. Yi Li. A cold shout came from the corner of the street. In the middle of the street, a fine horse was quickly galloping over. Immediately, a white-clothed figure appeared out of thin air. A sword energy flashed through the air. The assassins closest to Yi Li were all wounded by the sword energy. Bloody wounds appeared on their chests as they fell to the ground. Mo Xiaoyao landed on the ground. His face was dark as he took Yi Li from Feng Zhiyao's hands. He said anxiously, "Li Li. Yi Li." As he reached out to feel Yi Li's pulse, his hand, which had never trembled while holding the bloodthirsty sword, was trembling slightly. He couldn't even feel her pulse. Due to this, his handsome face couldn't help but show an anxious and gloomy expression. There was a hint of savagery between his brows. Feng Zhiyao saw that something was wrong and hurriedly said, Princess consort isn't injured. She just fainted." In reality, there was no need to feel her pulse to see that Yi Li's breathing was steady. However, Mo Xiaoyao's concern had caused him to panic he couldn't understand at all. Mo Xiaoyao paused. He seemed to have finally calmed down and a thread of clarity flashed through his eyes. Only then did he take Yi Li's pulse again. Even though he didn't understand, as a martial artist, he could feel the basic meridians. Feeling that Yi Li's pulse was steady and that she hadn't suffered any internal or external injuries, his expression eased slightly. Feng Zhiyao added, "This subordinate has already ordered people to bring a doctor over. Prince, why don't you first settle Princess consort down? Prince, there are only places to rest in the flower park. Why don't you send Princess consort there temporarily?" Sun Furen walked over and said with a pale face. Something like this had happened here today. It would be fine if nothing happened to Princess Consort. If something happened, no matter if it was related to the Sun family or not, the Sun family would not be able to escape responsibility. So even though Sun Furen's legs were weak from fright, she had to come over and speak. Mo Xiuya picked up Yili and glanced coolly at Sun Furen before walking into the flower park. The doctor didn't come slowly. Mo Xiuya had just been taken by Sun Furen to a small building in the flower park to settle Yili down when Qin Feng and Feng Jiao each came in with a doctor. These two doctors were not doctors from the Mahist army in the Prince Ding mansion. They were doctors that the guards had brought over from the nearby medical hall after receiving Mo Xiuya's orders. The two of them were also frightened when they were suddenly held hostage. When they saw the white-haired Mo Xiuya sitting by the bed with a dark expression, their legs couldn't help but collapse to the ground. Sun Furen hurriedly pulled the two up and said, "Doctors, please take Princess Consort's pulse." Reminded by her, the two doctors finally came back to their senses. Their limbs were weak as they walked towards the bed. But when they saw Mo Xiuya sitting by the bed, they didn't dare to go close. Mo Xiuya snorted softly. He examined the two doctors for a moment before standing and giving way to the bed. These two doctors were not important people, but there were all kinds of people in a place like the medical hall. Naturally, they did not lack information. At this time, they guessed which Wang Fei was the woman lying on the bed. Facing Mo Xiuya who was glaring at them, Mo Xiuya couldn't help but be more cautious. They took turns to take Yili's pulse. They looked at each other to exchange their diagnosis. Mo Xiuya, who was standing behind them, did not have such patience. He asked in a deep voice, "How is Li?" One of the doctors frowned and took the pulse again. After confirming it, he and his companion raised their hands towards Mo Xiuya and said, "Prince, please do not worry. Princess Consort is fine." Mo Xiuya's expression did not change for the better. He asked in a deep voice, "I am asking why Princess Consort is unconscious." The old man trembled in fright and hurriedly said, Princess Consort is almost 3 months pregnant. The reason why she's still in a coma is probably because the little prince in her womb was frightened just now. Chapter 701. What did you say? Everyone was shocked. Mo Xiuya grabbed the doctor's collar and asked. The doctor was so frightened that he couldn't speak. The doctor at the side quickly said, "Prince, the Wang Fei is indeed pregnant. Other than that, she hasn't suffered any injuries." In the room, Feng Jiao, Qin Feng, and Madame Sun all let out a breath of relief. Their hearts were filled with joy. Feng Jiao went forward to save the poor doctor who was about to be choked by Mo Xiuya. He said to Mo Xiuya, "Prince, congratulations to Prince. The Prince Ding mansion will have another little heir." Mo Xiuya finally came back to his senses. He walked to the bedside and sat down. He stared dazedly at the person sleeping on the bed. Feng Jiao shrugged helplessly. He turned to communicate with the doctor. "Is Wang Fei really all right? When will she wake up?" The doctor said in a low voice, "Wang Fei has suffered a great shock. The main reason is that the little heir's fetus is weak. She may have suffered a shock. Wang Fei fell into a deep sleep to protect the little heir. This commoner will prescribe some medicine to stabilize the fetus and calm the nerves for Wang Fei to take. Wang Fei will definitely wake up in 2 or 3 days at most." Feng Jiao looked solemnly at the two doctors and asked, "Are you sure?" The two doctors nodded helplessly with bitter expressions. "This commoner guarantees that Wang Fei is really fine. Speaking of which, Wang Fei's health is very good. Otherwise, with today's incident, a normal woman would have a hard time keeping her child." Wang Fei's fetus has only been slightly affected. It won't be a problem. Feng Zhiyao nodded in satisfaction and said, "That's good. I'll have to trouble the two of you to stay at the Prince Ding mansion to take care of Wang Fei. Of course, the Prince Ding mansion will give you a satisfactory consultation fee." The two physicians also knew that they didn't have any leeway to refuse, so they could only nod and agree. Feng Zhiyao sent people to take them to write prescriptions to decoct the medicine. After giving Yili the medicine and settling her down, although she was still in a deep sleep, Yili's complexion had clearly improved. Mo Xiaoyao's gloomy expression also slightly warmed up. When Feng Zhiyao came to report that all the assassins had been taken down, Mo Xiaoyao carefully tucked Yili in, stood up, and walked out. In the outer hall, Mrs. Sun was still waiting there, not daring to leave. Seeing Mo Xiaoyao come out, Mrs. Sun stepped forward and knelt on the ground, saying in a deep voice, "Sun Yushir asks Prince to punish me." Mo Xiaoyao snorted softly and said indifferently, "Tell I where those assassins came from within 2 hours. If you can't." Without waiting for Mo Xiaoyao to finish speaking, Mrs. Sun hurriedly said, "Thank you, Prince, for your mercy. This subordinate understands." She bowed to Mo Xiaoyao, then hurriedly turned and left. Mo Xiaoyao walked out of the door and glanced at Qin Feng, Zhuo Jing, and Lin Han, who were standing at the door. He said in a deep voice, "I will deal with you when Li wakes up. If anything happens to Li." Qin Feng said solemnly, "This subordinate understands." Mo Xiaoyao snorted coldly and left in a huff. Zhuo Jing and Lin Han, who were standing beside him, sighed. Zhuo Jing reached out and patted Qin Feng's shoulder as a form of consolation. Then, he and Lin Han quickly followed Mo Xiaoyao. At this time, although there were many people in the Sun family's garden, the atmosphere was so solemn that it was frightening. The noble ladies and young ladies who had come to attend this gathering were all detained in the open space by the water pavilion outside the garden. It was September and the Emperor of Xiling City was already a bit cold, but these noble ladies and young ladies stood in the cold wind for more than 2 hours in front of the expressionless Mahist army soldiers, and no one dared to make a sound. Bai Qingning sat down beside Mrs. Bai in a daze. Mrs. Bai had also been standing at the outermost area and was also quite frightened. The mother and daughter pair, one standing and one sitting, were inconspicuous in the crowd because the others were not much better than them. Not to mention, there were a few assassins who had been caught by the guards of the Prince Ding mansion not far away. After taking off their masks, there were actually some familiar faces among them. Those who were sensitive to current affairs could clearly feel that a storm was coming. "Greetings, Prince." As the guards of the Prince Ding mansion saluted respectfully, Mo Xiaoyao strode over in a white robe. His snow-white hair fluttered in the breeze, and for some reason, he made people feel a biting cold. Mo Xiaoyao did not look at the frightened ladies, but looked at the assassins who had been pressed to the ground. He lowered his eyes and asked, "Who are they?" Feng Zhiyao said in a low voice, "Prince, we have investigated thoroughly. They have different identities. This one is a guard of the West Hill Imperial Army, and the other is a minor official of the Ministry of War. They are all from the old noble families of West Hill." "Very good." Mo Xiaoyao laughed in a low voice. He lowered his head to look at the young man on the ground who had his leg broken but was still glaring at him with resentment. Squatting down, Mo Xiaoyao lifted the young man's face with one hand and smiled faintly. "The West Hill family. You really have guts. Mo Xiaoyao, don't even think about taking over the city of the Emperor of Xiling. Genom of Gojoseon will come back." The young man scolded angrily. Mo Xiaoyao was not angry. Enchanting. What a pity, in Enchanting's eyes, the city of the Emperor of Xiling is not that important. But don't worry, I can fulfill your wish. In the future, I will definitely scatter Lei Jinting's ashes in the streets of the city of the Emperor of Xiling for people to trample on. As for now, you should worry about yourselves. After he finished speaking, there was a cracking sound. The young man's face twisted, and his sternum strangely caved in. He began to spit blood from his lips. Mo Xiuyao, you will die a horrible death. You and Yili are both. Before he could finish his sentence, the young man's body suddenly flew backward, over the crowd, and directly hit the wall in the distance. There was a heavy thud, and the wall was already stained with dark red blood. The young man's body slid to the ground, limp and lifeless. You don't know what's good for you. The flower park was instantly silent. Everyone looked at the white-haired man standing in front of them in fear. It was as if the person standing in front of them was not a handsome prince whose name shook the world, but an evil Azura who had come out of hell. Mo Xiuyao did not look at the corpse in the corner. He lowered his head to look at the other assassin and smiled faintly. Royal guards. The Emperor of Xiling asked you to assassinate Isley. After being frightened, even the royal guards, who were known as the elites of the West Hill, could not help but feel a chill. It was my own idea. It has nothing to do with anyone else. If you want to kill me, do whatever you want. The royal guards gritted his teeth and suppressed the chill in his heart. Mo Xiuyao nodded. Very good, you have a backbone. I will fulfill your wish. Execute your whole family. Hearing this, the man's eyes suddenly widened. No, you can't. Then I'll let you tell me whether I can or not. Mo Xiuyao smiled calmly. Feng San, did you bring them here? Feng Zhiyao, who was standing to the side, looked at Mo Xiuyao, who was talking and laughing calmly. He sighed in his heart, hid the worry in his eyes, and nodded. Prince, all the assassins of the 3 clans whose identities have been found are waiting outside the door to be dealt with. Mo Xiuyao said calmly, kill them. Chapter 702. No. Prince Ding, you can't do this. In the crowd, Princess Lingyun stepped forward and stared at Mo Xiuyao. Mo Xiuyao curled his lips in disdain and said lightly, I don't need you to tell I what to do. Princess Lingyun said sternly, they are the officials of West Hill. Your Prince Ding mansion has no right to punish them. Feng Zhiyao stepped forward and stopped Princess Lingyun. He smiled faintly and said, they are the assassins who tried to assassinate Princess Ding. The Prince Ding mansion has the right to decide how to punish them. Princess Lingyun could not help but choke and argued, but their clansmen are innocent. Feng Zhiyao sneered and looked at Princess Lingyun with interest. Assassinating Ding Wangfei. It is not too much to say that the 9 familial extermination is a great crime, right? Moreover, the Prince Ding mansion is only implicating 3 clans. This is considered to be giving face to the Emperor of Xiling. Princess Lingyun's face turned ugly. These assassins were not of high status, and could even be said to be inconspicuous. However, their families were all prominent in West Hill, and most of them followed Jinan Palace. Moreover, the marriage alliances between the nobles were always between these families. If the 3 clans were implicated, at least half of the nobles in the Emperor of Xiling city would be killed or injured. The power of Jinan Palace could be said to be completely destroyed. Compared to her disappointing and weak father, Princess Lingyun had always respected her capable uncle, Lei Jinting. She had a good relationship with Jinan Palace. Naturally, she did not want Lei Jinting's power in the imperial city to be completely destroyed by Mo Xiuyao. Even if that's the case, we should report this matter to my imperial father before dealing with it, said Princess Lingyun. Feng Zhiyao sneered and said, the Emperor of Xiling City is now the Prince Ding mansion. Your Emperor of Xiling clan is only temporarily living here. Since when does the host need to consult the guest on how to do things? You're shameless. Princess Lingyun was speechless and could only curse. Feng Zhiyao rolled his eyes speechlessly. Just as he was about to open his mouth to rebuke Princess Lingyun, a white figure flashed past like a gust of wind. The arrogant Princess Lingyun had already been grabbed by the neck and her eyes rolled back. Mo Xiaoyao looked down from above and stared coldly at the exquisitely made-up woman in front of him. His voice was as cold as the wind. Since when did you have the right to interfere in Ai's business? Do you think you'll be fine just because you're the princess of Xiling? With Mo Xiaoyao choking Princess Lingyun, she almost couldn't breathe. With difficulty, she said, I don't care. Mo Xiaoyao didn't show any mercy. Princess Lingyun used all her strength but couldn't utter a complete sentence. She could only watch helplessly as her breathing became more and more difficult. Her heart was in so much pain that it felt like it was going to explode. How many of these people were brought here by you? Mo Xiaoyao asked. Princess Lingyun's expression changed and her eyes were filled with fear. She fearfully looked at Mo Xiaoyao's smiling face and saw the undisguised murderous intent in his deep eyes. No. This was Princess Lingyun's last word. Under everyone's gaze, Princess Lingyun, who had been arguing loudly just a moment ago, silently slid to the ground, blood seeping out of her lips. Ah! Someone finally couldn't stand the horrifying scene in front of them and screamed. Instantly, the flower garden became noisy. The women present all knelt on the ground and begged for mercy. Even someone like Princess Lingyun was killed by Prince Ding without hesitation, let alone them. Shut up! Feng Zhiyao looked at Mo Xiaoyao, who was clearly getting impatient amidst the noisy crying. He hurriedly shouted. With his shout, the crying stopped abruptly. Mo Xiaoyao walked to a chair that had been placed not far away and sat down. His gaze slowly fell on the mother and daughter of the Bai family, who were huddled in the crowd. When Bai Qingning felt Mo Xiaoyao's gaze fall on her, she couldn't help but shiver. She did her best to lean against Madame Bai. After what happened just now, she didn't have the slightest bit of ambition or status as Prince Ding in her heart. Right now, in her heart, Prince Ding was clearly much more terrifying than the evil spirits of the underworld. If she could leave this place immediately, she only hoped that she would never see this person again in her life. Bai Qingning. Mo Xiaoyao calmly called out. There wasn't a trace of joy or anger in his voice. The scene was chaotic just now, so Madame Bai didn't see what Bai Qingning had done. Although she was extremely afraid of Mo Xiaoyao, she only thought that Prince Ding had taken a liking to her daughter and hurriedly reached out to push Bai Qingning. Bai Qingning's body trembled. She repeatedly shook her head and hid next to Madame Bai, not daring to move. Feng Zhiyao, who was standing next to Mo Xiaoyao, waved his hand to the side. Two guards came forward and easily brought Bai Qingning in front of Mo Xiaoyao. Mo Xiaoyao carefully sized up Bai Qingning. After a while, he calmly said, not bad looking. It was clearly a compliment, but in Bai Qingning's ears, it was like a death sentence. Thinking about how Mo Xiaoyao had praised the two assassins for being very good and having backbone, Bai Qingning's face became even paler. Trembling as she knelt on the ground, Bai Qingning suppressed her fear and said, Prince. Thank you, Prince, for the compliment. Mo Xiaoyao coldly laughed, I didn't praise you. My beloved concubine is unconscious because of you. How dare you? No. Bai Qingning involuntarily cried out, it has nothing to do with me. I didn't do anything. She really didn't do anything. Yes, she had helped Yili, but that was an accident. The person she wanted to help wasn't Yili. Moreover, she just wanted to live. In that kind of situation, she didn't even have the strength to truss a chicken. Was it wrong to want to live? You didn't do anything. Mo Xiaoyao stared at her. Bai Qingning repeatedly nodded and said, "That's right, it has nothing to do with me. I didn't do anything." "You didn't do anything. You still deserve to die." Mo Xiaoyao's eyes were filled with viciousness. He stared at Bai Qingning with disgust and even hatred. His voice was gentle, "You were Bai Li's side. Why didn't you block for her?" Bai Qingning was speechless. So in Prince Ding's eyes, not blocking for Princess Ding was one of the reasons she deserved to die. "No." Bai Qingning repeatedly shook her head. A wave of unreconciled anger rose in her heart. Why? Why did she deserve to die just because she didn't block for Princess Ding? Why should she, a weak and powerless woman, block a sword for a person who was completely unrelated to her, who was skilled in martial arts? She just wanted to live. Was that wrong? No. I don't accept this. Bai Qingning sharply shouted.